Chapter 572. Beautiful. Feng Zhen took a hot bath and changed into soft, airy and light clothes. As he had been taking the hanshi powder all year round, his skin was very delicate. A slight abrasion would leave an obvious red mark, and it was extremely painful. That was why he could only wear old and worn-out clothes. After taking a shower, his long hair was still wet. He sat down and drank a cup of the wine Jiang Pengji brewed. As soon as the wine entered his stomach, he felt that it was incomparably hot. The warmth spread to his limbs and bones, and the tipsy feeling rushed straight to his brain. There's actually such a strong wine in this world? Beautiful. At first, he was not used to it, but after a while, the aftertaste was endless. The tipsy feeling made his whole body feel light. Awesome. It felt even better than hanshi powder. The corners of Jiang Pengji's eyes twitched. The audience in the streaming room expressed their worries. Shuzhongzi Yuyen Ruyu, streamer, are you sure it's enough for this guy to abstain from hanshi powder? Why don't I quit drinking too? Jianghu, not only must he abstain from alcohol, he must also abstain from gambling and lust. The live stream should spread positive energy. A guy like Feng Zhen, who has lost his inhibitions, should be reformed. She might as well let him become a monk and forget about the 5 skandhas. Luo peanut candy. Ha ha ha, although I should sympathize with him, I really can't help but feel sorry for Feng Zhen. Little angel. If he hadn't met the host, Feng Zhen would have been able to do whatever he wanted. He would have been able to court death however he wanted. But now, he has no choice. Meeting the host might have been the biggest disaster of Feng Zhen's life. Jiang Pengji said, alcohol can harm the liver easily, so you shouldn't drink too much. Just drink half a bottle today. She poured the rest of the wine into her own bowl and drank it all in one gulp. My wine. Just as he reached out to stop her, there were only a few drops of wine left in her bowl. It happened so quickly that Feng Zhen couldn't react in time. Jiang Pengji sneered. That's mine. Feng Zhen gritted his teeth and said, how can you be so despicable? He hadn't had enough. Jiang Pengji said, do you want more? Just endure the next craving. Feng Zhen. I have a saying, you are very arrogant. Does your father know? I don't know if I should say it or not. Lu Shi, come back here. Just as Jiang Pengji had said, it was very painful in the early stages of giving up the powder. It would act up frequently, but once it was over, it would be a whole new world. In the beginning, it would only flare up once every 1 or 2 days, and each flare up for more than half a day. Gradually, it became a flare up every 3 to 5 days, and it would flare up for an hour. 2 months later, Feng Zhen's vitality slowly improved. His cheeks had a healthy flush, and the green color on his lips had faded. Even his thin cheeks had gained some weight. He had yet to completely abstain from hanshi powder, but when his addiction flared up, he no longer needed Jiang Pengji's special care. Just based on his willpower, he could withstand the withdrawal symptoms and resist the urge to consume hanshi powder. This was considered a huge improvement. Of course, based on the ridicule from the audience in the streaming room, perhaps the appeal of fine wine to Feng Zhen was far greater than the hanshi powder. The benefits of quitting the powder were obvious. This was something Feng Zhen was most familiar with. Previously, his brain was like glass that was covered with dirt that was difficult to remove. Now that the dirt was gone, sunlight could pass through the glass without any obstruction. His thoughts were unprecedentedly clear, and his thinking speed was much faster than before. Even his memory had recovered a lot. One had to know that after consuming hanshi powder, his brain was somewhat sluggish and his memory was weak. He would often forget some unimportant things after hearing them. Jiang Pengji saw that he had recovered well. She directly brought him to the government office and assigned Dian Yan to be his temporary guard. Even if he ran to the toilet, Dian Yan had to wait outside the toilet and was not allowed to leave easily. This made Feng Zhen furious. Jiang Pengji said, isn't it because I'm afraid that your addiction will suddenly act up? With Dian Yan watching over you, I'm more at ease. Feng Zhen said, who would believe your words? Was it because she was concerned about him? The hanshi powder he had on him had been wiped clean. Even if he wanted to use it, he couldn't. Occasionally, his addiction to alcohol would kick in and he would want to drink a little or sneak out to play with girls, drinking and having fun. Not long after, Dian Yan would appear with a pair of glaring eyes. He looked at him without saying a word, not saying a word, just looking at him. Even if Feng Zhan was thick-skinned, he was too embarrassed to continue hugging girls. Was this concern? After a while, he was almost scared to the point of impotence. Jiang Pengji said seriously, "The autumn harvest has just ended. Fengyi County has to be busy with the matters of getting through the winter. Whether it's the people's livelihood or the army's training, they come one after another. At such a time, you're enjoying yourself alone. What will others think? After you're done with this, you can play as much as you want. I'll reimburse all your expenses. How about it? That good?" Feng Zhan was suspicious, but Jiang Pengji was too sincere. He couldn't help but choose to believe her. Feng Jin clicked his tongue. His lord's painting skills were even more exquisite. Feng Zhan still didn't know the fear of working overtime. However, he had secretly seen how Feng Zhan's addiction acted up. Now that he hadn't completely kicked the addiction, would there be any slip-ups if he was allowed to handle official matters? Jiang Pengji said, "It's all right. Don't be fooled by his sickly appearance. He has too much energy. Once he's idle, no one knows what he's thinking about. It's dangerous for his addiction to act up. Let him work hard in the government office and waste his energy. I guarantee that he won't even have the energy to think about what hanshi powder is." To put it bluntly, when the addiction flared up in the past, it was because he had nothing better to do. When he's busy, the situation will improve. She was speaking nonsense with a straight face, but Feng Jin didn't dare to agree. Why didn't he know that a heavy workload could help him kick the addiction? It was obviously his lord who was making things up. At the end of November, Gu Xian's trusted aide brought a group of merchants to the Xiangyang district. The items he brought this time were much more than the previous totals. "Your servant greets the owner." It was the confidant's first time meeting Jiang Pengji, but the respect on his face was not fake. "How's the plan this time?" Jiang Pengji discussed in detail with this confidant in the study. The guards and maids around were all cleared away. She even temporarily shut down the streaming room. Gu Xian's confidant was the manager of the treasure house. He said, "Everything went smoothly. All the colored glass of the Heavenly Palace has been sold to the North Borderlines Business Alliance at 30% of the price. The money and jewels exchanged are all recorded here. Owner, please take a look." Jiang Pengji reached out and received the thick and heavy account book. The records were indeed very detailed. There was not a single discrepancy in the amount. "You've worked hard this time. I plan to allocate 200,000 strings of coins to reward the merchant group that transported the goods." Although it was only 30%, the profit was undoubtedly terrifying. 20 sets of glass jewelry were sold at the normal price. The total was 1.83 million strings of coins. The remaining 2,000 sets were sold to the North Borderlines Business Alliance at 30% of the price. The total was 17.36 million strings of coins. The total was 19 million strings of coins. These were all exchanged for gold, silver and jewels of equivalent value. There was not much fluctuation. The manager of the treasure house also used more than 100,000 strings of coins to purchase a large amount of sheepskin and wool. It almost emptied out the stock accumulated by the farmers in the North Borderline. The manager smiled. This is what a servant should do. Chapter 573. The manager of the treasure house was indeed worthy of praise. Not only could he complete the task perfectly, but he could also keep his heart in the face of millions of dollars without greed. If Jiang Pengji did not reward him well and let him get the reward he deserved, who would work for her in the future? Even if she knew that the manager of the treasure house could achieve this, Gu Xian must have done something secretly. But the reward was clear and she could not be stingy. Therefore, in addition to the 200,000 strings of coins awarded to the caravan, she also took out an additional 20,000 strings of coins from the private treasury to give to the manager. Xueqi had been helping Jiang Pengji to manage the private treasury. He recorded every expenditure and income in detail. Seeing the two payments, even though he was used to seeing his lord's generosity, he could not help but be speechless. A total of 220,000 strings of coins. Not 22 strings of coins. Did he know what 220,000 strings of coins meant? He only needed to take out 10,000 strings of coins and he could buy a position as a district magistrate in Dongqing. If he donated 100,000 strings of coins, he could become a county magistrate in name only. If this wasn't a big deal, then what was? Xueqi looked at the two payments and sighed. When he saw the other payment, he was so shocked that he even threw away his brush. The annual income of the National Treasury was only 90 to 150 million strings of coins. His lord was just a district magistrate who occupied the entire territory of Xueqi County without a proper reason. Her income in a few months was close to 20 million strings of coins. Xueqi suppressed the urge to scream for a long time. Because of this, he was in a trance and almost floated to the government office of Xiangyang district. Feng Jin looked up and saw Xueqi, whom he had not seen for a few months. He was much thinner than he remembered. He said with concern, looking at Xiaoyu, the matters in Maolin district must be very heavy. If you are too tired, why don't you discuss with the Lord and rest at home for 2 days? Xueqi was stunned and regained his senses. I'm fine. The government affairs in Maolin district were indeed very busy. In the beginning, they were so busy that Xueqi almost forgot how it felt to sleep. Fortunately, he successfully got through that period and everything was on the right track. The following matters were handled by his subordinates according to the regulations. Xueqi only needed to handle some trivial matters and strengthen supervision and inspection. Feng Jin was surprised and looked at Xueqi from head to toe. Xueqi was still wearing the old clothes that his aunt and Xuanmei made for him a few years ago. The old clothes that originally fit him looked empty now. You should eat more. Look, you've lost so much weight. Feng Jin had a lot of work in the past 6 months. Logically speaking, his workload should be reduced by 20%. However, the food in the government office was too good. In addition, he had a virtuous and meticulous wife to take care of him. His face was ruddy and he looked like a flower that had been carefully watered. Xueqi nodded, still looking absent-minded. Before they could say more, unfamiliar footsteps came from outside the government office, accompanied by a tuneless tune. Xueqi frowned. Feng Jin said, "It should be Zhi. Zhi?" Xueqi was extremely busy in Maolin district. Occasionally, he had the time to pay attention to the matters in Xiangyang district. Feng Zhen was one of them. It was said that this person was addicted to hanshi powder and his behavior was unrestrained. Just based on this, Xueqi's first impression of Feng Zhen was that he was below the passing grade. Xueqi said, "Feng Zhi." Feng Jin nodded. As soon as he finished speaking, a figure in a green scholarly robe almost floated in. There was a slight smell of alcohol around him. His eyes were slightly narrowed, and he was humming an unknown tune. He mechanically said good afternoon to Feng Jin, then turned around to deal with his own affairs. Xueqi was a living person, yet he was neglected by Feng Zhen. He drank. Xueqi was surprised. The Lord actually indulged Feng Zhen so much that she allowed him to drink while working in the government office? Feng Jin let out a long sigh and said, "The Lord asked Dian Yan to keep an eye on him and not allow him to use hanshi powder or drink excessively. I don't know where this person hides the alcohol. He must be drunk during his lunch break every day. However, he does his work very well and has never made a mistake." For Jiang Pengji, as long as her subordinates did not step on her bottom line, she was happy to indulge them and allow them to have their own private hobbies. Feng Zhen could drink half a pot of alcohol every day under Dian Yan's pursuit and interception. It was impossible without Jiang Pengji's tacit approval. Feng Jin and Xueqi were both very disciplined in their personal lives. They were models of self-discipline when it came to Feng Zhen. Feng Jin and Xueqi definitely didn't approve of his behavior. However, since Jiang Pengji didn't pursue the matter, it wasn't appropriate for them to restrain Feng Zhen. The two of them did not purposely lower their voices, so Feng Zhen listened openly. He sneered and mocked the two of them. Dian Yan's pursuit and interception were powerful, but there were policies and countermeasures. Hiding a few pots of alcohol to secretly drink was a small matter. Not to mention, his drinking buddy was their lord, Jiang Pengji. It would be strange if Dian Yan found out. He thought proudly. When he lowered his head, he noticed that there were 2 more rolls of information on the table. The seal had not been opened yet. A letter for him? Feng Zhen opened it and he sobered up from his drunkenness. Ayaya. Oh no. Feng Jin heard the commotion and asked, "What happened?" Feng Zhen pinched his chin and said, "I never knew that I was so popular. Everyone was fighting over me." Feng Jin and Xueqi looked at each other in surprise. Someone had written a letter to Feng Zhen with the intention of recruiting him? The signature is interesting. Shangyang Feng Huaijie. Why is this name so similar to Huayu's? Looking at the date of the signature, it was actually half a month earlier than Xueqi. It was just that the geographical distance was different. He had received Xueqi's letter first. Feng Huaijie? Wasn't that Feng Jin's younger brother, Feng Ju? Xueqi turned his head. As expected, Feng Jin's expression had darkened. It was as if a thick layer of black paint had been applied to his face. That's my younger brother, Feng Jin answered. Feng Zhen looked at the letter in surprise and then looked at Feng Jin. Feng Ju and Feng Jin were actually biological brothers? Were they really from the same mother? Their temperaments did not seem like it. Compared to the somewhat unrestrained and rebellious Feng Ju, Feng Jin was a proper son of an aristocratic family. His every move seemed to be measured by a ruler. He was neither distant nor close. He did things by the book. It was no wonder that Feng Zhen did not associate the two of them together. After a while he smiled and said, "The person that Huaijie is assisting is quite ambitious. Our Lord will not submit to anyone. If the two of them were to fight, there would definitely be a battle. In the future, I'm afraid that the situation of you brothers fighting each other will be unavoidable." Feng Jin's expression darkened even more. He hated Huang Song. He really did not know what kind of magic potion that Huang Song had fed Feng Ju. How could a mere eunuch's son be worthy of Feng Ju's full support? Humph. We all serve our own masters. If such a day really comes, Jin will naturally clean up the mess. Feng Jin snorted softly. His impression of Feng Zhen had also worsened. Feng Zhen did not care. His personality was not suitable for dealing with such righteous gentlemen. Opening the other letter, Feng Zhen clicked his tongue. It looks like that Huang Song really does have some skills. Feng Jin raised his eyebrows. What's wrong? Chapter 574. Strike first and gain the upper hand? Jiang Pengji occupied the entire territory of Fengyi County. She had 20,000 meticulously trained troops in her hands. Next spring, she would be able to sweep through Wanzhou and take over the entire province. When the time came, she could directly write a memorial and force the Dongqing royal family to confer her the title of governor of Wanzhou. If they sent a large number of troops across half of the north to attack Huang Song in order to nip their enemy in the bud, they would not be able to conquer Wanzhou next year. But they would not be happy to allow Huang Song to grow at the border between the south and the north. Feng Jin said, "It's better to discuss this with the Lord. Should they allow a strong enemy to grow, or should they focus on their own development and strength first?" For Jiang Pengji, she could make the right choice with her eyes closed. "Why are you in such a hurry?" she said with a smile. "I've heard of Cheng Jing. He's one of Master Yuanjing's 4 disciples. He has a great background, but don't forget that our Zixiao is also Master Yuanjing's disciple. So what if Huang Song has Cheng Jing's assistance? Can he do whatever he wants? I've also studied at Langyi Academy for a few years, so I have a certain understanding of Cheng Jing. He's nothing to be afraid of." Hearing words like, "whatever he wants," Feng Jin and Xueqi looked serious. They did not understand, but Feng Zhen, who was very dirty, understood instantly. If Cheng Jing is incompetent, how could he be valued by Master Yuanjing? Feng Zhen heard Jiang Pengji say that Cheng Jing was nothing to be afraid of, and he could not help but frown. Feng Zhen had always admired this good friend he had met through Xueqi. He had also given Cheng Jing a high degree of recognition. Jiang Pengji's contemptuous attitude made him a little unhappy. "I'm not saying that Cheng Jing is incompetent. I'm just saying that he and Huang Song are partners. I'm afraid they'll drag each other down." Jiang Pengji said, "I know Huang Song. I've also heard a little about Cheng Jing from the many students at Langyi Academy. They can go through thick and thin together, but they might not be able to enjoy happiness together. Cheng Jing is much more hairy than Huayu. Not only does he measure himself by the standards of a gentleman, but he also likes to measure others by the same standards. As for Huang Song, he's a man who doesn't make any major mistakes, but he's full of small ones. TSK. These two people's personalities aren't compatible, unless one of them makes a concession and changes." Jiang Pengji paused at this point and continued, "To put it simply, Cheng Jing's character requires a tolerant lord who doesn't mind his little criticisms. Huang Song, on the other hand, needs a subordinate who ignores his small problems. Otherwise, it will be a disaster. Of course, everything has a honeymoon period." At this time, Huang Song and Cheng Jing were still in a state of intense love. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and they were satisfied wherever they looked. Huang Song's influence was small at the moment, so he would naturally exercise caution and restrain himself. Cheng Jing would also wholeheartedly assist him and do his best to assist him. However, when Huang Song's strength increased and he had more people by his side, Cheng Jing's advice might be an eyesore. After saying that, she concluded, we just need to take care of our own matters. Standing firm is far more important than anything else. Feng Zhen said, if Huang Song is allowed to grow, he will definitely become the Lord's #1 enemy. Jiang Pengji sneered. My rival? Even if he cultivated for another 8 to 10 years, he still wouldn't be qualified. Even if he could stand up to me as an equal, he still wouldn't be able to defeat me. If we focus on such a strong enemy and neglect more important things, then we'll have our priorities reversed. According to Jiang Pengji's original plan, her battlefield would be the northern borderline and the north of Dongqing. She had no time to care about the southern region for the time being. Without Huang Song, there will still be LV Song or He Song. Only by being strong can we be fearless. Therefore, Jiang Pengji still insisted on her own opinion. Next spring, they would conquer Wanzhou. As long as they occupied Wanzhou, along with the nearby Chongzhou and Hu County that was secretly controlled by Lu Shi, the three places would be connected. When the time came, they would have money, food, manpower, and soldiers. Then they could restrain the cavalry. It was not impossible to defeat the northern borderline. What were the benefits of defeating the northern borderline? Not only were there rich mineral resources, countless gold, silver, and jewelry, but there were also vast territories and commercial areas. There were also countless horse farms and elite war horses. The horse farms in Dongqing were concentrated in Cangzhou. If they could not conquer Cangzhou or obtain the support of the Meng family in Cangzhou, the cavalry would not be of any use. If they could encroach on the northern borderline, with the horse farms and elite war horses, would they have to worry about not being able to form a cavalry? With the cavalry, it would be a piece of cake to turn around and attack the forces in Dongqing. Feng Zhen looked at Jiang Pengji seriously. He sighed in his heart. This child had a firm heart and was not moved by external factors. She had the appearance of a wise ruler. This winter, I'll have to trouble you again. After spring, we will prepare for war in Wanzhou. Does anyone have any objections? Feng Jin and Xueqi's expressions changed drastically. They seemed to recall the fear of working overtime last winter. Only Feng Zhen, who did not understand the situation, replied with a smile. How would I dare to refuse the Lord's request? But, my lord, don't forget our previous agreement. They had to hold on to the support of eating, drinking, and having fun. This was their meal ticket in the future. Jiang Pengji returned a light smile. Of course. How could I forget what I promised Zi Shi? Xueqi gave Feng Jin a look and inquired about the situation. What shady dealings did the Lord and Feng Zhen have with each other? Feng Jin secretly sighed and mumbled to himself. Xueqi almost choked from laughing. How can you take my lord's words seriously? Xueqi laughed and ridiculed him. My lord often says these things, but she doesn't know that the government office is always busy. They are only busy for a short period of time throughout the year, and that short period of time is a year. How can there be time for him to eat, drink, and have fun? Feng Jin said. Isn't that so? Throughout the year, there are only 7 days of rest before and after the new year. However, during these 7 days, the eateries, gambling dens, brothels, and southern courtyards are all closed, preparing to celebrate the new year with their families. The shops are all closed. I don't know where he is going to enjoy himself. Sigh. Another one who has been fooled by the Lord. I don't know when he will find out the truth. I'm afraid it won't be too late. The two looked at each other and smiled. They saw the gloating look in each other's eyes. In Chengan district, Wei Xi also received the news that Cheng Jing had pledged allegiance to Huang Song. He could only lament about fate. Yongxi was a man with sharp eyes. His evaluation of Huang Song and Cheng Jing was not much different from what Jiang Pengji had said. Wei Xi responded with silence. Yongxi said, You and Cheng Jing are brothers from the same sect. If you fight in the future, I'm afraid it will be difficult. Wei Xi said indifferently, In terms of difficulty, can it be more difficult than the brothers Huayu and Feng Jue? It was not just Feng Jin and Feng Jue. The two brothers' eldest brother assisted another person. It was obvious that the three brothers were hurting each other's hearts. Then why do you look sad? Wei Ci did not answer. How could he answer? Could he tell Yang Si that he was silent only because Cheng Jing had also served Huang Song in his previous life? Cheng Jing was imprisoned when Huang Song's power was at its peak. Because the ruler and his ministers had different opinions, the conflict became more and more acute. The conflict of many years erupted and could not be resolved. In the end, Cheng Jing was imprisoned for more than 2 years. When Huang Song was defeated and committed suicide, Cheng Jing heard the news and finally committed suicide in prison. Chapter 575. Yang Si pinched his chin and said, "Don't you have a wide social circle in Langi Academy? Think of a way to deceive a few more people. Your lord has been studying at Langi Academy for 3 years. Classmates are more reliable than other relationships. It's better to help him than Huang Song." Wei Ci smiled bitterly. He didn't want to be deceived. It was obvious that it was difficult to recruit him. In Cheng Jing's previous life, his lord, Huang Song, committed suicide. He also committed suicide in prison. The person who defeated Huang Song was Jiang Pengji. In Lu Zheng's previous life, after his lord became the emperor, she personally led the army. In the end, Her Majesty led thousands of elites to attack and beheaded him. Several princes fought for power, but they were devoured by Jiang Pengji one by one. Lu Zheng chose to surrender for the sake of the people in the city, but he chose to climb the city wall and jump down. He swore before he died, which became a debt of blood that Jiang Pengji couldn't erase. In Han Yu's previous life, although his lord was killed, he accepted the offer of amnesty. He thought he could live out his life peacefully, but when he was middle-aged, his wife and her family secretly plotted a rebellion in the palace. They wanted to change the regime. Unfortunately, he was stupid and the plot was exposed. Han Yu was implicated and committed suicide by swallowing gold. In Wei Ci's previous life. Let's not talk about him. Anyway, he killed himself in the end. Thinking about it, the death of Master Yuanjing's disciples was related to Her Majesty. As for the other students who came out of Langi Academy, they were either dead or injured. Wei Ci really wanted to pull all the classmates he knew over. At least he could avoid a bloody battle, right? But with his lord's temper, not all counselors were suitable for her. The relationship between the ruler and the minister was not one-way, but two-way. Only when both were suitable could it be a good story. For example, Huang Song was also a future lord. In Wei Ci's previous life, he was only one step away from being the ruler of the world. Master Yuanjing once said that Cheng Jing was a talented assistant to the king, a minister who saved the world. When these two met, it should be a strong alliance, but what happened? The relationship between Huang Song and Cheng Jing broke down. The latter was imprisoned for more than 2 years and finally committed suicide for his lord. The best talent might not be the best choice. His lord only needed to choose someone who could truly assist her. Everyone has their own aspirations, we can't force them, Wei Ci said. He was wholeheartedly thinking for Jiang Pengji. Naturally, he had to choose the best and most suitable helpers for her. He could forget about those who would drag her down. Having been reborn, Wei Ci was very open-minded. Yang Si clicked his tongue and said mockingly, "I think it's most likely because your master wasn't very popular during his studies, right? Why is it that your lord has more potential than Huang Song, but Cheng Jing thinks more highly of Huang Song? Think about your lord's unforgiving mouth. TSK. Let's make an irresponsible assumption. Could it be that your lord had severely offended Cheng Jing when he was studying in the academy?" Wei Ci was speechless. He avoided the topic and focused on the trivial. Yumo finished his apprenticeship a long time ago. When my lord was in Langya County, the two of them should not have met. Since they had never met before, there was naturally no problem of not offending him. However, Jiang Pengji was studying in Langi. Wei Ci spent most of his time outside, but it did not mean that he did not care about the matters of the academy. In terms of popularity, his lord was not very popular in Langi Academy. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. His lord's character was rather casual. Most of the students in the academy were serious people who conformed to the rules and did things by the book. The latter naturally looked down on Jiang Pengji's casual behavior and style. They even wished they could cover their noses and pass by. However, in terms of friends, she also had friends who were relatively close to her. It was just that most of them were fair-weather friends who drank and drank together. Yongxi rested his chin on his hand and said, "Sigh, that's probably not fated. However, I heard that Cheng Jing's talent is no less than that of Prime Minister Huangfu of the previous dynasty. Are you really not worried that Cheng Jing will help Huang Song gain a foothold in the north? When that time comes, he will be a huge problem." Wei Xi said, "Even the cleverest housewife can't cook without rice." "What do you mean?" "They lack money." Wei Xi smiled and said, "They won't be developing quickly in a short period of time. Their momentum won't be strong." Yongxi said, "That may not be true. I've learned about Huang Song from Prince Changsho. This person's family really doesn't lack money. Huang Song's grandmother was originally a widowed woman from a poor family. Because of her beautiful appearance, Huang Tan took a fancy to her. Huang Tan took her as his wife and adopted the son of the widow's ex-husband, who was Huang Song's father. He treated Huang Song like his own son. Huang Tan doted on Huang Song like his own grandson. Huang Song's father used Huang Tan's connections in the court to do a lot of business deals. He made a lot of money and was very wealthy. Huang Tan's power was overwhelming. He secretly diverted the national treasury. Wasn't the business of a few generations for the sake of their descendants? The savings of Huang Tan and Huang Song's father were ultimately given to Huang Song. Huang Song's family was supported by Huang Tan and had improved a lot in the past few years. Huang Song lacked manpower, but he definitely did not lack money. Now that he had the help of two heavyweights, Feng Ju and Qing Jing, he would probably not lack manpower in the near future. Wei Xi smiled and said, "What I mean is, Huang Song is not as rich as my lord." In his previous life, Huang Song did develop rapidly and occupied a large piece of fertile land in the north of Dongqing. Wei Xi was really not very worried. Jiang Pengji's starting point in her previous life was very low, but she still managed to rise to the top. Now that she had such a good start, there was no reason for her to fail miserably. Huang Song is very smart. Without absolute confidence, he will not take the initiative to provoke a strong enemy. Wei Xi and Jiang Pengji had the same opinion. They should concentrate on developing their own strength. Only then could they occupy a place in this chaotic world. In the short term, they probably won't go against each other. Not only would they not go against each other, but the two families might even form an alliance and cooperate for a while. Just as Wei Xi had this idea, Cheng Jing was also persuading Huang Song to build a good relationship with Jiang Pengji. Cheng Jing looked at the entire great universal geographical map and said in a low voice, "The situation in the north seems to have taken shape. Lu Shi has occupied Chongzhou. Hu County is his old nest that he has operated for many years. According to his methods, even if he gives it up, Hu County will still be in Lu Shi's hands. Hu County used to be a barren land and unruly rivers. It did not belong to any prefecture. Its area was slightly larger than the smallest prefecture in Dongqing. Now it was Dongqing's largest county in terms of production. Chongzhou, Hu County, and a third of Wanzhou, which Jiang Pengji occupied. The power in the north was basically in the hands of the Lu family father and son. If my lord wants to compete with Lu Shi, don't fight with him before the situation is developed. You should focus on the south." Although the Lu family father and son occupy the north, the three tribes of the northern borderline are still eyeing the north covetously. They have no time to care about the power in the south. "This is a good opportunity for my lord." Huang Song sighed and said, "But Yumo, Prince Changsho and Qinzhou are still competing in the south. We can't afford to offend either of them." When the immortals fought, the mortals suffered. Two skinny camels were still bigger than a horse. Huang Song was really no match for them. Cheng Jing smiled faintly and said, "Not necessarily." When Prince Changsho and Qinzhou fought, it was hard to determine a winner, but this also meant that both sides were exhausting each other's strength. Chapter 576. Huang Song thought about Jiang Pengji's character and said with a bitter face, "Even though the three tribes of the north borderline are keeping an eye on him, Lu Shi has a strange temperament and does unexpected things. Last year, he was still the district magistrate of Xiangyang district. Now, he has occupied Fengyi County and doesn't care about the imperial edict. If she were to attack Huang Song on a whim, Huang Song would not be able to defend himself." Cheng Jing said, The news of Anyina's second princess consort's sudden death has spread to the 3 tribes of the north borderline. The barbarians have coveted the central plains for a long time. Latest by next spring, when the grass is plentiful, they will gather their troops to attack Dongqing. Isn't Lu Shi's Chongzhou the first to be attacked? Lu Shi was inevitable when the 3 tribes of the north borderline attacked Dongqing. Now, Chongzhou was probably already actively preparing for war against the cavalry of the 3 tribes of the north borderline. Why would they care about Huang Song? Lu Shi was Lu Shi's father. If his father was in danger, Lu Shi would probably go bankrupt to resist the cavalry of the north borderline. In comparison, Huang Song did not have such pressure from foreign enemies. Even if Huang Song developed later than Lu Shi, this gap could be made up for. Lu Shi and his son were tied down by the 3 tribes of the north borderline. Whether they won or lost, the price they would pay would not be small. Under such circumstances, it was still unknown who was stronger between Huang Song and Lu Shi. Huang Song was originally a little depressed, but after Cheng Jing's analysis, he gained some confidence and regained his vigor. Seeing this, Feng Ju secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Previously, losing Yang Si was indeed a big blow to Huang Song. Now that Cheng Jing had arrived, it could be considered to have made up for the loss. The others were also on their way. Huang Song even sent invitations to his family members. A few talented people came one after another. When everything was on the right track, Huang Song's power would develop rapidly and the Dongqing royal family would be at the end of their road. Huang Song and Cheng Jing talked in detail for a long time and felt like old friends at first sight. Cheng Jing said, "I heard that Huaijia's second brother, Feng Jin, is under Lu Shi?" Huang Song tensed up while Feng Ju furrowed his brows. Huang Song said, "Everyone has their own master. Huaijia is Huaijia and Feng Jin is Feng Jin. Yumo, don't be suspicious." Cheng Jing smiled and said, "I'm not suspecting Huaijia. I'm just worried that Lu Shi will send troops to Wanzhou next spring, and Shangyang County will collapse on its own. If Shangyang County also surrendered, Chengde County would be the only one left and Lu Shi could easily take it." Huang Song was stunned and could not react for a moment. "Why?" Feng Ju understood that the key was still Feng Jin. Cheng Jing explained, "The Feng family's ancestral home is in Shangyang County, which is now the Shangjing region. The county governor of Shangyang County has an extremely good relationship with the Feng family. Feng Jin is the second son of the Feng clan. With this relationship and the fact that Lu Shi has a powerful weapon in his hands, it's hard to guarantee that the Feng clan won't come forward to persuade him. The Feng family was one of the 4 noble families of Dongqing and was the local tyrant of Shangyang County. Even the county chief had to submit to them. The attitude of the Feng family could greatly affect the final fate of Shangyang County. If Shangyang County stubbornly defends the city, even if the city is breached in the end, Lu Shi will at least bleed a little. If the city collapses on its own, this person's power will be preserved to the greatest extent." Cheng Jing smiled and said, "I am more inclined to think that Lu Shi can take advantage of the situation. The aristocratic families were used to judging the situation and doing things flawlessly. In the face of a powerful army pressing down on their borders, naturally, submitting was the best option. Not to mention that Feng Jin was working under Lu Shi. For the Feng family, the benefits of submitting were far greater than resisting to the death. If they knew that it was impossible to do, they would be brainless and definitely not an aristocratic family." Cheng Jing chose Huang Song not only because Huang Song was more in line with his temperament and was closer to the image of a wise ruler in his heart. Another important reason was that Lu Shi seemed to be doing well now, but in reality, he was walking on a tightrope. The slightest sign of trouble could lead to eternal damnation. Were the 3 tribes of the north borderline just for show? The more glorious Lu Shi was now, the more pressure he would face in the future when he faced the oppression of the 3 tribes of the north borderline. In comparison, Huang Song was more in line with his expectations. However, all of this was based on the fact that the 3 tribes of the north borderline had the ability to invade the south. Did the north borderline have the ability to invade the south? Wei Ci smiled without saying a word. At the beginning of the 11th month of the 20th year of Tian Wu, there was a horse plague in the northern borders. The war horses died of the disease, and only 1 out of 10 survived. He still remembered that in his previous life, the 3 tribes of the northern borderline had been sharpening their swords to attack the central plains, but a few Fergana stallions from Shalan had caused an unprecedented large-scale horse plague. Countless war horses died of the disease, with less than 1 or 2 survivors. The combat power of the cavalry was almost completely destroyed. By the time the 3 tribes of the northern borderline recovered from the blow of the horse plague, the Central Plains was already in full swing, with several feudal vassals supporting them. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline launched a sneak attack on Jiang Pengji's lair behind her. Coincidentally, Qiguan Rang was the one who stayed behind to guard the lair, so the 3 tribes of the northern borderline did not gain much of an advantage. When Jiang Pengji returned from the war, she exploded in anger. She took her weapons and went to the north borderline, temporarily escaping from the chaotic war in the Central Plains. Oh, then the north borderline was dumbfounded by Jiang Pengji's mad dog style of fighting. Her majesty was now more powerful than she had been in her previous life. Once she unified the north, she could take the initiative to attack the 3 tribes of the northern borderline before they could recover. There was a saying that went, "Take advantage of your illness to kill you." Thinking of the rich horse farms and countless mineral resources of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, Wei Ci almost smiled until his eyes were squinted. Every time he saw Wei Ci smile so viciously, Yang Si could not help but have goosebumps all over his body. On the other side, Jiang Pengji almost exploded in anger. She temporarily did not have time to care about the horse plague in the northern borderline. She only wanted to know which B*TCH had impregnated her White. The war horses had all been gelded. How could White be pregnant? Could it be that the stableman had done something deranged? Stop licking. I'm asking serious questions. Jiang Pengji raised her hand to stroke White's mane, a smile still on her face. She turned her head and stared fiercely at the stableman who was in charge of the stable. White rubbed Jiang Pengji's face innocently, sticking out its tongue to lick her from time to time. Its tone was a little heavy. Jiang Pengji lost all her anger, allowing White to express its affection freely. Since the last battle, Jiang Pengji rarely took White out for a walk. It was no wonder that the little girl missed her so much. She wanted to go hunting today, get some game, and have a barbecue and hot pot with her friends in the government office. The stableman pulled White out. She took a look and almost exploded in anger. Dian Yan nimbly pressed the stableman to the ground and waited for Jiang Pengji's orders. The stableman trembled with fear and said, "My lord, I don't know what happened." Jiang Pengji's gaze shifted to White's belly. She could already see that it was pregnant. She also felt a weak fluctuation in its body. It was obviously pregnant. However, the war horses had all been gelded. White had very high requirements for its partner. Every spring, there were male horses who asked for love, but they were all kicked away by the little girl. It was late autumn now. How could it be pregnant? Jiang Pengji reached out and touched White's belly. She could vaguely feel something. Mammals were much more vigilant during pregnancy. Whoever touched a mare's belly was guaranteed to be rewarded with a hoof. However, White trusted Jiang Pengji very much. Its temper was still docile. Well, this was only limited to Jiang Pengji. To others, it was a tsundere queen. Whoever provoked it, it would kick them. Are there any clean male horses in the stable? Chapter 577. The audience in the streaming room was dumbfounded. They wanted to watch Jiang Pengji hunt and roast game. They didn't know how the plot had developed to this point. Why did she suddenly say that she wanted to seduce a stallion? A friend who lived in the northern grasslands was experienced and explained the reason. Han Mei Wu de Jun. Is Lady White going to be a mother? When the bullet screen was posted, everyone was silent for a while. Then they exploded. Munyo Lumi. F***CK. Bring me my 40-meter knife. Which shameless stallion impregnated my daughter White? Did he get my permission? Streamer, you don't have to do anything. I can castrate that shameless stallion. Peepa eats pie pa. No. Wait a minute. Our White is a girl? Isn't it a handsome young man? Nuwa is not a Nuwa. Jia? White is such a handsome horse. Isn't it a handsome young man? I really like how it cooperates with the streamer in battle. When it raises its hooves and kicks people, it can shatter a person's sternum with one kick. Such a fierce horse is actually a girl? Yu Zhao Shingu. #despise. The streamer is such a fierce guy, but she's a girl. Why can't White be a girl? Jiang Pengji comforted the affectionate White while she questioned the stableman sternly. White was her mount. It wasn't spring now. How could she put a stallion that hadn't been tempered in her white stable? Her Dubai's exclusive VIP stable wasn't something that any horse could stay in. The stableman looked up with a surprised expression. He stuttered, "There is indeed such a stallion. Bring it out. I'll lick it myself." Jiang Pengji turned her face away to avoid White's affectionate tongue as she fumed. It was hard to bear a beauty's kindness. After a few rounds, she felt that her hair was about to be licked off by White. The stableman refused to move. Jiang Pengji frowned and asked sternly, "What's wrong? My orders don't work?" Seeing that Jiang Pengji was really angry, the stableman said in fear and trepidation, "Please forgive me, my lord. It's just that horse. That horse is a rare, fine horse. I thought that my lord asked me to put it in the same stable as White in order to matchmake the two of them." Jiang Pengji was confused. Ha! In that split second, Dubai's tongue had already lapped a circle around her cheek. This stable driver was also a horse lover. In the past 2 years, he had even treated the mighty and majestic Dubai as his own daughter. Every day, he would cut the freshest and highest quality horse grass for Dubai to eat, so that it could maintain its glossy and beautiful appearance and maintain its healthiest state. More than a month ago, the caravan presented a mixed-blood horse from the northern borderline as a tribute. The young man was very handsome. The stableman was also trembling with fear as he asked what to do with the stallion. It was not molted at such an age, so it was obvious that it was kept as a stud to breed better offspring. Jiang Pengji's answer was to put it directly in White's stable, so the stableman did as he was told. After listening to the coachman's aggrieved narration, Jiang Pengji finally recalled the memories of that period of time. Jiang Pengji rubbed the space between her brows with a slight headache. War horses around 2 years old had all been molted. Before the steward of the treasure house presented the horse, he only said that it was a war horse from the northern borderline with excellent bloodlines. Its sire was a Fergana horse from Shalon, but he did not say that the horse had not been molted. War horses that had not been molted had explosive temperaments and were extremely difficult to tame. If it was the spring season, it would be even more difficult to control. Jiang Pengji originally wanted to wait for Li Yun to return before giving him this good horse, but now it seemed that it was impossible. She was not sure how good Li Yun's horsemanship was, and she did not want him to take the risk to tame a wild and untamed horse. The stableman asked with trepidation, "My lord, do I still need to bring Little White over?" Little White. The corners of Jiang Pengji's mouth were slightly out of control. "Bring it over." The stableman did as he was told. When she saw the horse with the word, "good," written on it from head to toe, Jiang Pengji finally understood why it was called Little White. When Dabai saw Little White, he took 2 steps forward and rubbed against it. It responded warmly. Even its steps were extremely graceful. This horse really hasn't been molted? She had never seen such a graceful and obedient stallion. Little White's build was slightly more muscular than Dabai. Its fur was also snow white without a trace of other colors. Standing beside Dabai, they looked like biological sisters. Seeing Dabai take the initiative, she was momentarily speechless. She was speechless, but the audience in the streaming room could help her ridicule. "Can't think of me D. Ah, my daughter Dabai is indeed a queen. It must have tamed Little White." Casually take 1. Of course. Actually, at Dubai's current age, she is considered a leftover woman among the horses. Little White seems to be only a little over 2 years old. It's a little fresh meat. The baby of these two must have a very good bloodline. Streamer, please don't break them up. Still sound nice. Generally speaking, war horses in ancient times were molted. They were easy to tame and manage. They would keep the stallions with the best bloodline and in the best condition as stud horses to breed strong offspring. Although Little White is a little delicate, it is still the descendant of a Fergana horse and a war horse from the northern borderline. It may not be pure blood, but it is still the 2nd generation. Streamer, please don't bully it. Jiang Pengji frowned and asked the stableman how much a stallion from the horse farm in the northern borderline cost. The stableman did not know about the situation in the northern borderline, but he had heard about the price of a stallion from the Tsong Prefecture horse farm. A stallion with a good bloodline cost around 100,000 strings of coins. This was a good stallion found from outside. If it was a stallion from the farm, the price would definitely not be so expensive. Jiang Pengji was stunned for a moment. She glanced at Little White. The stallion seemed to be a little afraid of strangers. It shrunk behind Dabai. Zhang Pengji asked, "What about this one?" The stableman said, "I have inquired about it from the caravan. Little White seems to have been bought for 150,000 strings of coins." A stallion worth 150,000 strings of coins? Why does it look so scared and timid? Zhang Pengji took a deep breath and said, "Forget it. I won't do it." After a while, she asked, "You have a lot of experience in raising horses. What do you think of Little White's body? Is it sick?" What stallion would be so shy and timid? It was as delicate as a lady from a noble family among horses. Her Dabai, on the other hand, looked like a domineering CEO. Zhang Pengji was really a little worried about a horse from the northern borderline. However, she sensed that its body condition was very good. The stableman hurriedly said, "No, Little White's body condition is excellent." Zhang Pengji was silent for a moment, then she sneered and said, "I have never seen a war horse with such a timid temper." Dabai was pregnant. It was not good for Zhang Pengji to ride it to hunt. She simply asked someone to put a saddle and stirrup on Little White. The stableman said in a panic, "My lord, you can't. This horse has not been tamed. If it accidentally startles my lord." Chapter 578. Did Little White have the ability to throw Zhang Pengji off the horse? Reality proved that it had the heart but not the guts. Animal senses were far stronger than humans. The more intelligent an animal was, the stronger it was. When ordinary people faced Zhang Pengji's aura, they would only feel that this person's aura was as tall as 2.8 meters. She was dignified and unfathomable. But in the eyes of these animals, it was a naked threat, as if they had met their most terrifying natural enemy. Not to mention Little White, a horse that grew up on a horse farm. Even a wild horse would involuntarily be afraid when it met Zhang Pengji. Why did Zhang Pengji like Feng Jin's Chongqing so much? Because when children are ignorant, they are as sensitive as animals. Chongqing was not afraid of her, but was close to her. Of course she liked it. Similarly, Little White was so obedient, she could not dislike it. Little White knew that a wise man submits to circumstances. It ran fast and steadily, and did not make any mistakes in its commands. Zhang Pengji rode it to hunt. She thought it would be frightened by the prey, but it proved that it was not timid. Small prey occasionally jumped out of the bushes, but it was calm and composed. Its endurance, running speed, and posture. All these qualities did not disappoint its bloodline. Zhang Pengji rode on Little White's back, holding White's reins in her hand. While hunting, she walked White to let it have some fresh air. It stayed in the stable all day, and White was pregnant. If it did not go out to get some fresh air, who could control it if it got angry? After running one round, Little White's performance was satisfactory. Zhang Pengji allowed it to stay in the VIP stable of her White family. Zhang Pengji returned with a full load of prey. It was the season when the prey was plump, and barbecued had a special taste. However, White is pregnant. Keep an eye on it. She instructed the stableman who took care of White. If Little White is restless, separate them. The stableman nodded and bowed, hurriedly agreeing. White was reluctantly led back to the stable by the stableman. Along the way, it looked back 3 times, making Zhang Pengji feel extremely guilty. This was a small episode. Zhang Pengji told Li Yun and the rest about it as an interesting story. The construction of Maolin District, Chungan District, and Jiaoping District was still in full swing. Because they had absorbed a large number of refugees and escaped members of the Tsingyi Army and the Red Lotus Group in the past 6 months, in addition to the prisoners of war that they had previously captured, there was no shortage of people in all aspects of construction. Everyone had survived the busiest period, and the rest of the matters could be handled according to the regulations. Qiguan Rang and the rest could finally take a break from their busy schedule and slightly relax. After settling the matters in each district, the few of them sneaked back to Xiangyang District for 2 days. Li Yun was originally busy in Maolin District. Later on, it was decided that Chungan District would be used as a trial district for farming. He was transferred to Chungan District to help out. This fellow is extremely talented in farming. In the past half a year, the reclamation and distribution of wasteland has been completed. Hearing that Dabai was pregnant, and that the stallion was an excellent warhorse with half of the Shaolin nation's Fergana horse bloodline, he couldn't help but be tempted. "Master, Jiang Pengji flipped the roasted meat and asked, "What's wrong? If Great White gives birth, can I reward the foal it gives birth to?" Just as Li Yun opened his mouth, a sharp gaze focused on him. Which man doesn't love horses? Debai's quality is obvious. The stallion is a valiant warhorse with the bloodline of the Fergana horse. How bad can the offspring of the two be? For a military general, if he can obtain a warhorse that is full of spirituality, of excellent quality, and is connected to his heart, it will be like adding wings to a tiger on the battlefield. It is hard to find even with money. The moment Li Yun opened his mouth, he reserved a good horse with great potential in advance. He hated himself for not speaking up earlier. Li Yun actually snatched it first. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "All right, if you like it, you can take it away." "Thank you, master." Li Yun's cheeks were flushed with joy. It was unknown whether it was because he drank too much or because he was too happy. A family of people roasting meat in the government office. The scene was too beautiful, and the style was too strange. It was Yang Xi's first time in Xiangyang district. It was also his first time participating in a gathering of this nature. Yes, it was also his first time using the glass grill that was hard to find outside to roast meat. He felt that the value of every piece of meat was elevated. He squinted his eyes and swept his gaze across Jiang Pengji's subordinates. He frowned slightly. Logically speaking, the northern borderline situation was precarious. Why were these people not the least bit nervous? Instead, they ate the roasted meat with gusto? Especially Feng Zhan, who was dressed in old clothes and had drunk so much that his eyes were misty. It was as if his bones had gone soft. He leaned against Wei Ci. Wei Ci sighed. It was not good to push Feng Zhan away. When the roasted meat was almost finished, Qiguan Rang and the others looked at each other. Then, Feng Jin was pushed out. He bowed and said, "Master, according to the news from Chongzhou, the northern borderline has already prepared their troops. How should we deal with them?" The few strategists returned from the other 3 districts not only to eat this roasted meat, but also to discuss countermeasures. Jiang Pengji chewed the meat in her mouth a few times and swallowed it. She said rather straightforwardly, "Different situations call for different measures. What else can we do?" Everyone was speechless. Feng Jin sighed and could not help but say intimately, "Master, don't joke with me. I'm being serious." "I'm being serious too. We're having a gathering to eat roasted meat. What's the use of talking about such annoying matters?" Jiang Pengji said nonchalantly. Yang Xi and Feng Zhan subconsciously frowned. So unreliable? Wei Ci smiled and tried to smooth things over. "Master, you have a countermeasure in mind. It's indeed not suitable to do it at this gathering and dampen everyone's spirits." Feng Jin secretly glanced at Wei Ci. His expression was natural, as if Jiang Pengji really had a countermeasure. Jiang Pengji said, "I'm waiting for the news. If the news is true, everyone will have a good time this year. There's no need to worry about the threat from the northern borderline. There's no need for them to find trouble with us next year. In 2 years, we'll take the initiative to find trouble with the northern borderline. It's important to eat and drink and enjoy ourselves to the fullest." Yang Xi secretly glanced at Wei Ci. He had a feeling that Wei Ci and his master had reached an unspeakable tacit understanding. What news is District Magistrate Lu waiting for? Yang Xi had not pledged allegiance, so he addressed Jiang Pengji differently from others. News from the racecourse in the northern borderline. As soon as Jiang Pengji's voice fell, a messenger came in from outside. He half knelt on the ground and raised a bamboo slip with both hands as a token. She smiled. There was not a hint of anger on her face. She said, "I'll go take a look. Is it good news or bad news?" Opening it, the contents of the letter made her lips curl up. Wei Ci asked, "Is it good or bad?" "Of course it's good," Jiang Pengji said. "Now, the northern borderline will not be able to jump around." It was true that the butterfly effect had changed many things, but some symbolic events still happened as promised. Shalan was thousands of miles away from the northern borderline, and even further away from the hinterland of the Central Plains. They chose the best Fergana horses from their country to sell to the northern borderline. How could they have known that these horses would be infected with a horse plague during the transportation? The horse plague had an incubation period. A few horses died along the way, but the horse dealers did not notice. They just thought that the horses were not used to the foreign environment. How could they have known that they had been infected? Chapter 579. Due to the special nature of warhorses, most stallions would be castrated. Castrated warhorses were more docile, easier to tame, and easier to control. A small number of excellent stallions would be kept as breeding stallions to ensure that the next generation would be of the highest quality. This generation's king of the northern borderline royal court was not a wise man, but he was ambitious and could listen to the advice of others. Under the advice of the wise man, he integrated the business alliance and tightly controlled the resources of the horse farm in the hands of the royal court. He could not easily sell the warhorses. The former prevented external business impacts and strengthened the local business competitiveness. The latter increased the military strength of the northern border and the prestige and rule of the imperial court. In the past, as long as he had money, he could buy enough good warhorses from the northern borderline horse farm, but now he couldn't. In order to provide the warriors of the northern borderline with better warhorses and improve their overall combat effectiveness, the imperial court of the northern borderline would allocate a sum of money to purchase Fergana horses from Shalon every year. They would then rent these horses to the major horse farms, and the second-generation warhorses that were bred were not allowed to be sold. The three tribes of the northern borderline had always relied on cavalry as their main combat power. Relying on this method, their combat power skyrocketed. Before the fall of the Great Xia dynasty, the three tribes of the northern borderline treated the Great Xia dynasty as their suzerain while they themselves were their vassal states. They paid tribute to the Great Xia dynasty every year and called themselves their subjects. Now that the Xia kingdom was destroyed, the 9 states were divided into 5 countries. The 4 tribes of Nanman, which used to be a vassal state like the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, had destroyed the royal family of the Nanxing kingdom a year ago and occupied half of the Nanxing kingdom. From being a vassal state, they had turned the tables and occupied the territory of the sovereign state. This made the 3 tribes of the northern borderline much more confident and ambitious. If the barbarians of the 4 factions of Nanman could do it, why couldn't they, the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, do it? Dongqing failed to live up to expectations and was in constant civil strife. It was the best time for the northern borderline to send troops to the Central Plains and conquer the world. In order to cultivate more combat power, the royal court of the northern borderline purchased more Fergana horses from Shalon every year. In the beginning, he only used 1 or 2 horses to test the waters. Now there were more than 10 or 20 of them. He had planned to buy 35 of them this year. Unfortunately, the Fergana horses were delicate, and some of them died on the way. Even so, the northern borderline still bought 19 Fergana horses and loaned them out according to the size of the farm. Then, according to the usual practice in previous years, the stud farm bred the stallions and mares. Because the management of the stud farm was excellent and the weather in the northern borderline was not bad, the mares were in heat all year round. The Fergana horses sent by Shalon were all around 4 years old, which was the golden age for breeding. The Fergana horses rented by the northern borderline imperial court had a time limit, and the horse farm did not dare to waste time. This was the busiest time of the year for the stud farm. Of course, the ones who were busy were the slaves who took care of the horses. There was only a very small amount of time that they could take a break from their busy schedule. 3 to 5 slaves gathered together and whispered, "Don't you think it's strange? Why do these Fergana horses feel particularly dull this year?" Another slave said, "It's because they're not used to the climate. Besides, they've always been sent in spring or summer in the past. This year they're late, so naturally they won't be as strong." That's true. It was not easy to be a stud horse. There were hundreds and thousands of mares that were of the right age to be pregnant, but the stud farm was only allocated 1 or 2 Fergana horses. About half a month later, the slaves taking care of the Fergana horses were horrified to find that one of the horses had fallen to the ground without warning. They called the veterinarian, and only then did they discover that the horse was seriously ill. It was fine before, how could it? The slaves were so anxious that they broke out in a cold sweat, and their teeth chattered in fear. As slaves of the stud farm, their value was not even as important as the mane of a Fergana horse when they were tied up in a bundle. Now that their precious Fergana horses were sick, they would not be able to absolve themselves of the blame even if they died 10,000 times. Something even more worrying happened. This seriously ill Fergana horse was still vomiting blood, and its skin was always showing bruises and bruises. The stud farm thought that the slaves had secretly injured the Fergana horses, and was furious. They immediately disposed of a group of slaves. The veterinarian did everything he could to treat it, but the horse still died of illness. The corpse soon rotted and stank, and the smell was extremely strong, attracting many insects and mosquitoes. A Fergana horse was worth as much as 400,000 to 500,000 strings of coins. Who wouldn't feel heartache for losing so much money when one died? Because these Fergana horses were rented from the northern borderline imperial court, the stud farm had to take full responsibility and compensate for the losses. In the end, none of the slaves taking care of the Fergana horses could escape. They were all brutally killed and buried with the horses. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline had the custom of sky burial. The Fergana horse was diagnosed by the veterinarian as suffering from a strange disease, so it was also given a sky burial. This seemed to be the beginning. Just half a month after the death of this Fergana horse, news came from another stud farm that a Fergana horse was seriously ill. The symptoms of the second horse were exactly the same as the first one. There had never been a horse plague in the northern borderline, so they naturally didn't think of the symptoms of these 2 sick horses in this direction. Even if they did, they would deny it. As far as they knew, horses with horse plague would get sick in 7 or 8 days at most, and those with acute symptoms would show signs of serious illness in 1 or 2 days. They had only heard of horse plague from the horse traders of Shalon, and there was no such thing in the northern borderline. These Fergana horses had traveled thousands of miles from Shalon for almost a year, and after arriving at the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, they had been breeding at the stud farm for more than half a month. There was no sign of illness at all, and at most, they were a little listless. If it were a horse plague, they would have died a long time ago. Little did they know that there were different kinds of horse plague. The horse plague in Shalon was acute, and symptoms were bound to appear within half a month of infection. The mortality rate was more than 90%. This time, the source of the horse plague was not in Shalon, but on the way. Even the horse traders of Shalon didn't know when they got infected. The incubation period was extremely long. Depending on the physical fitness and resistance of the horse, the incubation period ranged from 1 to 4 months. Of course, once the disease broke out, it meant that the condition was so serious that it was impossible to save it. For example, the first Fergana horse that died of illness. Its internal organs were almost full of extravasated blood and thick fluid, and its skin was covered with large areas of extravasated blood. Therefore, the owner of the stud farm suspected that the slaves secretly vented their anger on the Fergana horse and beat it until it was seriously injured. More importantly, the carcass of this sick horse needed to be cremated, otherwise insects, mosquitoes, and flies would spread the disease to other hosts. For example, horses, mules, and donkeys were all susceptible hosts. Among them, pregnant mares and weak young horses were the most susceptible. With the second one, there would naturally be a third and a fourth. There was almost no time gap. At this moment, the breeding at the stud farm was basically coming to an end. The successive deaths of the Fergana horses attracted the attention of the royal court of the northern borderline. The king of the royal court ordered a thorough investigation of the matter. It was only then that everyone remembered the horse traders of Shalon, except that they had already left 2 months ago after receiving the money. Before they could investigate, all kinds of bad news came from the stud farm. The 19 horses bought at a high price all died, leaving no survivors. Each of the 19 Fergana horses cost between 450,000 to 600,000 strings of coins. For them, the royal court allocated at least 10 million strings of gold, silver, and jewelry. Now that they had all died after just 1 round of breeding, who would compensate for this loss? Faced with this loss, the king of the royal court of the northern borderline roared in anger. Chapter 580. The source of horse plague was spread by insects and flies, and the host's physical constitution directly affected the incubation period. Northern borderline advocated sky burial, and the corpses of the Fergana horses were left to rot on the ground and become food for insects, birds, and beasts. The stud farm was not a clean and dust-free place, and the slaves would not be on guard against those small insects. It was conceivable how terrible the horse plague would be if it really spread. The royal court of northern borderline was cheated of a huge sum of 10 million strings of coins by the horse dealers of Shalon. Fortunately, all the mares had been bred, and more than 1,000 mares were found to be pregnant successfully, barely recovering some losses. Otherwise, the royal court of northern borderline would have really suffered a great loss this time. However, the bad luck did not end there. About half a month later, the previously pregnant mares had a high fever, and their whole body seemed to be swollen. They breathed like a cow, and occasionally coughed violently. Their nostrils were wide open, and a lot of mucus with foamy liquid flowed out. It was obviously seriously ill. The slave taking care of the pregnant Mares was so scared that he hurriedly reported the matter. The slave trembled, and his body shook like a sieve. He kept begging for mercy, for fear that he would also be secretly dealt with. Could it be that the disease of the Mares was caused by the Fergana horses? The owner of the stud farm looked gloomy. The Mares lay on the ground of the stable, breathing heavily, but their bodies were swollen as if they had been filled with water. They were so sick that even a blind man could see that the pregnant horse was seriously ill. Can it still be saved? The veterinarian shook his head helplessly with a bitter face. Ordinary minor diseases could be treated, but it was really impossible to save a fatal disease like this. The owner of the stud farm secretly clenched his teeth, and his eyes seemed to be shooting venom. They had already lost too much money on the Fergana horses. Fortunately, the chances of the Mares getting pregnant were relatively high. If they could successfully give birth, the losses on the northern borderline would be even. After breeding and breeding for 3 to 5 years and training them into powerful warhorses, they would be able to recoup their previous losses. What about now? The pregnant Mares that had been carefully taken care of like gold were sick, and the condition was so serious that even the veterinarian could not save them. The Mares died, and the fetus in their wombs could not be saved. They had lost a mare of good bloodline and a colt with more potential. Thinking of this loss, the owner's heart was about to break. Before he could recover from this blow, the slaves in another area came to report that there was another pregnant horse that was seriously ill. What? The world spun, and even the owner's voice changed. After a while, he resisted the urge to roar and smash things. He hurriedly said to the vet, "Go and take a look." It was the same illness. Seeing the second sick mare, the owner's heart sank, and he quickly said, "Check all the pregnant horses." It was obvious that the disease of the Fergana horse had spread to these Mares. If it was discovered early, they might still be able to save it. However, the symptoms during the incubation period of the horse plague were mild. At most, there would be some mental exhaustion. The pregnant horse's mood was not high to begin with, so it was really difficult to judge. In the end, the veterinarian still found 5 sick horses with symptoms, and they were urgently quarantined from the stud farm. This matter once again alarmed the entire royal court of the northern borderline. The king of the northern borderline roared in anger, and his subordinates silently endured the others' verbal attacks. Wise man Wu Liba had previously been shelved by the king of the northern borderline for nearly a year because he opposed the extravagant atmosphere. The king of the northern borderline could indeed listen to advice, and he was ambitious, but deep down, he was still a man of the northern borderline, and he worshipped force more. He was especially disdainful of Wu Liba's wise man and great principles. What was so great about having a glib tongue? In addition, he had a temperament that liked to enjoy and indulge in extravagance. Wu Liba opposed the extravagant atmosphere of the northern borderline aristocrats, and wasn't that the same as controlling his daily behavior? In the past year, Wu Liba had been given the cold shoulder by the king of the northern borderline, and was even berated from time to time. However, the king of the northern borderline's brain was still there, and he did not do anything too overboard. He only let Wu Liba relax his work. Now, in the face of these dangers, he thought of this good helper again. "Do you have a plan, my dear subject?" Wu Liba thought for a while and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, your subject thinks that we should be more ruthless and abandon those pregnant horses." When the king of the northern borderline heard this, he almost fainted in anger. He asked with all his sincerity, "And the other party gave him such a lousy idea? Abandon all the pregnant horses? Why didn't they just go to heaven?" The Fergana horses that Shalon bought had already cost them 10 million strings of coins. Those Mares were also warhorses with the best bloodline in the northern borderline. Although they were not as expensive as the Fergana horses, they were still worth 30 to 50,000 strings of coins, or even more. The total number of Mares that were successfully pregnant was more than 1,500, and the number of Mares that were not pregnant was 2 to 3,000. If all the Mares that had been touched by the Fergana horses were to be slaughtered, the loss would be so great that it would be heartbreaking. Get lost! After catching his breath, the king of the northern borderline was so angry that he grabbed something beside him and threw it at Wu Liba. What kind of lousy idea was this? The 19 Fergana horses had already cost them a huge loss of 10 million strings of coins, and those maras were also worth 40 to 50 million strings of coins. In addition to the foals of the Fergana horses in their bellies, if they were to abandon all of them, the three tribes of the northern borderline would suffer a loss of 70 to 80 million strings of coins this time. Which of the maras that could be kept as breeding horses were not the cream of the crop? Now that they were all killed, how many elites would the war horses of the northern borderline lose? Wu Liba was hit squarely, and his neatly combed small braids became messy. He did not say a word and bowed in silence. He also knew why the king of the imperial court was so angry. The loss was simply too great. But he had a hunch that if he did not do this, perhaps the loss in the future would be even greater. However, the king of the imperial court would not agree to his suggestion, and the owners of the major horse farms would not agree to it either. The king of the northern borderline ordered the horse farms to keep the news under wraps, so that the determination of the warriors of the northern borderline would not be shaken. At the same time, he ordered his men to quickly get rid of the sick horses and treat them, trying to recover as much of the loss as possible. After a while, his hair had turned quite a lot white. However, the insects and flies that had been feeding on the corpses of the sick horses had already spread, and it would be difficult to suppress them again. Among the sick horses, 9 out of 10 died of illness, and the remaining one survived, but the foal in its belly had also died in its belly. The bad news was far from over. Not only did the pregnant horses show signs of illness, but even the foals in the horse farms were having problems. During those few days, the horse farms of the northern borderline were in a state of panic, and the royal court of the northern borderline was filled with all kinds of angry roars from the king. The horse farms were heavily guarded, and not a single word leaked out. The spies that Jiang Pengji sent did not find out the specific situation in the horse farms, but to her, this bit of information was enough. Chapter 581. Wei Xi opened it and read it. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. His dark eyes were filled with some joy. He passed the scroll to Feng Zhen, who was closest to him. Feng Zhen leaned on his shoulder as if he had no bones. He wanted to put all his strength on him. Wei Xi poked him with the bamboo scroll. Everyone's eyes shifted to Feng Zhen. Only then did the latter secretly curse Wei Xi for being sinister. He took it and opened it. Feng Zhen raised his eyebrows slightly. Although he did not have the ability to predict the future, judging from Jiang Pengji and Wei Xi's attitudes, he could probably guess something. Something happened to the horse farm in the north borderline? Feng Zhen did not know about the horse plague, but he vaguely figured out the truth when he read the contents of the scroll. Yang Xi said, "What? Something happened to the horse farm in the north borderline?" With that, his suspicious gaze fell on Wei Xi. He suddenly remembered that this guy had once kept him guessing. Everyone was deeply worried about Princess Anyina's death. They were afraid that the three tribes of the north borderline would use this as an excuse to attack the unstable Dongqing. Only Wei Xi was confident and not worried at all. He even had the attitude of watching a good show. Could it be that he already knew? Yang Xi took the scroll from Feng Zhen's hands and read the contents quickly. The more he read, the more confused he became. It only says that the horse farm in the north borderline is heavily guarded. There is no other information. Why are you so sure that something happened to the horse farm? It could be that the north borderline has drawn up a battle plan and increased the security of the horse farm to prevent enemy spies. You must know that the horse farm is the lifeline of the north borderline. Could it be that you evil people deliberately went to the north borderline to add something to the feed of the war horses? The north borderline relied too much on cavalry. The ratio of infantry to cavalry was 1:2 or even higher. They wanted to make the entire army cavalry. If the cavalry did not have powerful war horses, could they still be considered cavalry? The horse farm in the north borderline was considered an important strategic resource for the three tribes of the north borderline. If something happened here, the combat power of the cavalry would be almost useless. It was not that the cavalry did not have the ability to fight without horses, but that the cavalry of the north borderline was more inclined to fight on horseback. Without war horses, the north borderline army would not have any advantage when fighting against the Dongqing army. They might even be at a disadvantage because of Dongqing's cities. It was not that Yang Xi could not see the trick. He just could not believe that there was such a coincidence in the world. Not long ago, the north borderline was still sharpening their knives to conquer Dongqing. Immediately after, Something happened to the horse farm and the war horses. Wasn't this a joke? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, Jing Rong, you must be joking. The stables in the north borderline are heavily guarded. If I had the ability to tamper with the horses' feed, why didn't I just send someone to assassinate the king of the northern borderline? This is just my guess. Whether it's true or not, we just need to wait patiently. Yang Si frowned. Recalling Wei Si's previous attitude, he felt that this matter was not that simple. Jiang Pengji and Wei Si had the same temperament. Their habit of keeping people in suspense made people want to beat her up. Yang Si put on a fake smile and said, Magistrate Liu is so confident. Something must have really happened to the Beijiang stud farm. In the time it took to speak, the letter had already been circulated among the crowd. They were more inclined to Yang Si's view. The reason why the Northern Kingdom increased their surveillance of the horse farm might be to guard against spies from other countries. As for an accident at the stud farm, what were the chances of that happening? He always felt that things couldn't be so coincidental. The northern borderline was about to send troops south, and the cavalry was crippled. However, there was no shortage of coincidences in the world. The king of the northern borderline angrily rejected Wu Liba's suggestion to slaughter the mares. Instead, he hoped that the veterinarians could control the horse plague. In the end, there were war horses dying of illness every day. Batches of pregnant horses died. The atmosphere in the northern borderline's royal court became more solemn by the day. It was previously said that the incubation period of the horse plague was related to the host's physical fitness. Pregnant horses and foals were the easiest to be infected. Naturally, the first to break out of the horse plague were also the pregnant horses and foals. Even though the northern borderline had been wealthy all these years, they were still shocked by the large-scale horse plague. The horse farm was not only related to the lifeline of the northern borderline's army, but it was also related to their economic lifeline. Every time they lost a pregnant horse or foal, their losses would increase greatly. In less than half a month, the number of dead mares had reached a terrifying 2,500, and the foals were even more severely injured. At this time, the king of the northern borderline could no longer hold on. He chose to follow the wise man Wu Liba's suggestion and slaughter the horses that had come into contact with the sick horses. However, it was too late. Other than the horses in the horse farm having problems, the ordinary horses of the herdsmen were also showing signs of illness. Upon receiving the news, even though the king of the northern borderline was used to seeing storms, he could not help but be stunned on the spot. Report. When it rains, it pours. When a ship is late, it is hit by a headwind. There was no worst, only worse. King, sick horses were found in the warhorse stables. What? The king of the northern borderline was shocked. He slammed the table and stood up. Who knew that his movement was too fast and the scene in front of him was unclear? The officials' eyes were filled with fear. One by one, they stepped forward to support the king's strong body that had collapsed. If the horse plague had only spread in the horse farm, the northern borderline could have covered up the news. However, the source of the disease was insects and flies. The people did not notice that these small things carried the source of the horse plague. How could they prevent it? When the herding horses of ordinary farmers also discovered the same illness, the news could no longer be hidden. Chongzhou and the northern borderline shared a border. Lu Shi was the first to receive the news. War horses, dying in large numbers? Lu Shi was so shocked that he could not speak. The secret agent said, Yes, this news can no longer be hidden. The number of war horses dying from the disease is increasing every day. It is said that the sick war horses often die from the disease. The mortality rate is extremely high. My lord, there are many war horses in Chongzhou. Should we take precautions? If the horse plague was allowed to spread to Chongzhou, they would not even have the strength to cry. The northern borderline occupied the horse farms with abundant grass and bred countless war horses. However, the war horses in Dongqing came from Cangzhou. Cangzhou was under the control of the Mengs. No one knew what was wrong with the Mengs. In recent years, they had been finding trouble with Lu Shi and competing with him. In Dongqing, if one wanted war horses, one could not offend the Mengs. Therefore Lu Shi, who had offended the Mengs, could not get his hands on the Cangzhou war horses. The war horses in Chongzhou all came from the northern borderline. If these precious war horses died from the disease, they could only rely on their 2 legs to fight in the future. Lu Shi deliberated and said, Of course, we must not let the sick horses enter the country. This matter. Send a secret letter to inform Lanting. A large number of war horses from the northern borderline dying from the disease was a good thing for Dongqing. Lu Shi was the magistrate of Chongzhou. If the northern borderline attacked Dongqing, the first place they would take care of would be Chongzhou. One could imagine how much pressure he would be under. Now, with the blessing of their ancestors, the northern borderline had met with bloody misfortune. Lu Shi felt that he could not help but laugh out loud in his bed in the middle of the night. Of course, was the misfortune of the northern borderline over just like that? Chapter 582. The three tribes of the northern borderline were originally scattered in the form of many ethnic groups and tribes. They chased after rivers and herded horses. There were always disputes and fights between each tribe. Later, a tribe suddenly rose up with the support of the last emperor of the great Xia dynasty. It took decades for them to unify the major tribes of the northern borderline. This powerful tribe was the Chong tribe. It was said that they were the remaining descendants of the Chong Wu tribe. They were the most powerful, populous, and wealthy tribe among the three tribes of the northern borderline. The royal court of the three tribes of the northern borderline was different from the Central Plains. The power structure was even more complicated. If it was the royal court of the Central Plains, if the emperor was muddle-headed and immoral, the people would mostly choose to tolerate it. If the ministers could not persuade them, they would mostly turn a blind eye or do whatever the emperor wanted. But in the northern borderline, the situation was different. If the king of the royal court was incapable, the elders of the three tribes had the right to use their respective powers to depose him and elect a new king. Wu Liba had long suggested to the king of the royal court to slaughter the maras that had come into contact with the Fergana horses of Shalon, but the king had hoped for a fluke. As a result, the horse plague had enough time to spread and cause immeasurable losses to the major horse farms. Who was to blame for this? Before the king of the northern borderline consolidated the horse farms, the major horse farms were owned by the prominent nobles of the northern borderline. The nobles were willing to let the horse farms be under the control of the royal court because it was profitable. Now that the king's wrong decision had caused them to suffer such a huge loss, how could the powerful nobles take it lying down? When the news of Lu Shi reached the Xiangyang district, the three tribes of the northern borderline were already fighting amongst themselves. The prestige of the royal court had suffered a huge blow. Jiang Pengji wore a slightly thicker hemp garment. She sat by the ridge of the field and wore a bamboo hat to block the sun. Although there was a drought this year, the harvest was good. Last year, when the Xiangyang district was conquered, a large amount of wasteland was cultivated in one go. Almost every household was given more than 10 mu. After experiencing the joy of the harvest, the people were burning straw to make the fields more fertile. Jiang Pengji listened to the secret report quietly and looked up at the sky. It was nearing the end of autumn. According to previous years, the first snow should have fallen. Jiang Pengji said calmly, "Don't worry. When the first snow falls, the horse plague in the northern borderline will be suppressed. However, the losses that have already occurred cannot be recovered. Tell father that if he has the ability, he should try his best to sow discord within the northern borderline. The great king of the northern borderline has made a serious mistake in his policies, causing huge losses to many aristocratic horse farms. I think he is also full of bruises now, right?" During that time, Jiang Pengji was either busy at the carpentry workshop or working in the fields. The audience in the streaming room thought she was going to change her profession. Now that Lu Shi's secret envoy had arrived, everyone seemed to be on steroids. Inian Chuzhong. Ha ha ha. I can laugh at this joke for a year. The three tribes of the north borderline wanted to invade Dongqing, but God didn't give them face and coldly threw them a horse plague. Great. Now even the king of the imperial court will be chased down. Stir-fried mushroom. The three tribes of the north borderline don't even have the right time, yet they still have the courage to attack Dongqing. Who gave them the courage? Liang Jingru? But now the horse plague had come, and the war horses were dying one after another. I have checked with Baidu. Ha ha ha, the ancient war horses are really expensive. The horse farms of the north borderline were almost wiped out. How much money did they lose? Luori Yingtianqiang. No. They did lose a lot of war horses, which are very expensive when converted into money. But you have to know that war horses are not currency, nor are they liquid funds. The losses of the three tribes of the north borderline were actually not that huge. If the war horses of the north borderline could be sold, the price to others would definitely be high, but it can't be said that the war horses were worth that much. The three tribes of the north borderline owned horse farms of all sizes, and they had the final say on the price. Outsiders didn't know the actual cost of a war horse. Jintian Kaya Hizi. That's true. We calculated their losses based on the price of the war horses. If we calculated it based on the cost, the losses would definitely not be as big as we thought. But it shouldn't be much different. Anyway, it was a huge loss. Shidama Jinji. Am I the only one who is worried that if the streamer attacks the north borderline in the future, how will the horse plague be solved? Jiang Pengji glanced at the bullet screen of the live stream. The secret messenger had already left. She seemed to be daydreaming, but in fact, she was sending a bullet screen in the live stream room. Streamer V. After listening to the secret messenger's report, I can more or less guess how the horse plague spread. It is most likely related to mosquitoes and insects. The source of the horse plague came from near Shalon. The climate there was humid and hot. There was no frost or snow in 4 seasons, and it was mostly spring or summer. If mosquitoes and insects were the source of transmission, then when the weather turned completely cold and snow covered the earth, the horse plague would naturally be suppressed. There were only a few ways for the source of transmission. After Jiang Pengji ruled out all the ways of transmission, she targeted the mosquitoes and insects that were more common on the grasslands. Although there was no conclusive evidence for this guess, she trusted her own judgment more. If it was airborne, even if the source of the disease had a very long incubation period, the horse plague would be concentrated in a few days and spread throughout the grasslands of the north borderline. The results proved that this was not the case. The horse plague spread in all directions in the form of radiation infection. The speed of transmission was not fast, but it was not slow either. The audience in the live stream room suddenly realized something. Scarlet Starry Sky. I feel that this horse plague is a bit like the African horse plague, but the incubation period is longer and the fatality rate is higher. Heroes of the Storm. Anyway, it's good that the streamer knows what to do. We'd better watch the show quietly. At that moment, an audience member suddenly raised a question. Nuanling. I suddenly thought of something. Little White also came from the north borderline. Could there be a source of the horse plague? Everyone was anxious at the thought of such a handsome and well-behaved star horse suddenly dying. Streamer V. Little White is in good condition. It's fine. The manager of the treasure house told Jiang Pengji that he had bought a snow-white fine warhorse and wanted to present it to her. At that time, Jiang Pengji carefully inquired about some details. After making sure that Little White was fine, she asked the groom to throw Little White into White's VIP stable. The manager of the treasure house left the north borderline with Little White. He deliberately took a detour to reach Xiangyang district, which took more than a month. If Little White was sick, he would have died on the way. How could he reach Xiangyang district safely? There were burning straws everywhere in the fields. Jiang Pengji got up and put on her wooden clogs. At that moment, Li Yun also returned from his patrol. There was a simple smile on his face, which attracted the attention of many young ladies. My lord. Jiang Pengji nodded, indicating that it was time to leave. Li Yun was so happy that he showed his white teeth. I thought there would be no harvest due to the drought this year. I didn't expect it to be a year with a small bumper harvest. He checked the harvesting situation of each household's fields. The food was enough to feed the people of Fengyi County. Chapter 583. It's a small harvest. We should go back and celebrate. The way to celebrate was nothing more than gathering to eat barbecued meat or hot pot. The guest house had already opened branches in the other 3 counties, but the people there had just settled down and business was slow. The guest house in Xiangyang district was full. The weather was getting colder by the day, so the guest house launched a hot pot and barbecue series that was very popular. The people only cared about food, clothing, 4 dishes, and soup, but Jiang Pengji and the others had to consider more far-reaching things. For example, how should they conquer Wanzhou next year? Wanzhou consisted of Fengyi County, Chengde County, and Xiangyang County. All 4 counties of Fengyi County were in Jiang Pengji's hands. The imperial court could not protect itself and had no time to care about the north. The chief of Fengyi County had been rebuked by Jiang Pengji. He did not have the guts to ask her for Fengyi County. Chengde County was in the hands of the Red Lotus Group, But after the drought in summer, the situation there was also precarious. No matter how good the Red Lotus group was at brainwashing, they could not stop the increasing number of refugees. The population loss in Fengyi County was extremely serious. Finally, there was Shangyang County. Speaking of Shangyang County, Fengjin had to be mentioned because he was from there. Shangjing used to be a part of Shangyang County. Before Dongqing established its capital, Shangjing also belonged to Shangyang County. Later, Dongqing moved its capital to Qinzhou, so Shangjing naturally belonged to Shangyang County again. After experiencing the earthquake last summer, the north suffered heavy losses and was continuously ravaged by the Xueqi army and the Red Lotus group. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a living hell with starving people everywhere. The roadside was littered with bones and it was unbearable to look at them. Chengde County is controlled by the Red Lotus group. Shangyang County has yet to fall into the hands of any party. After all, the Feng family was one of the 4 noble families of Dongqing. Naturally they had troops. They did not have many people, but there were 3,000 to 4,000 of them. Their combat power was considerable. Coupled with their local reputation, when the Xueqi army and the Red Lotus group were plundering everywhere, the Feng family had already thought of ways to mobilize the people to defend the city. They had money, food, and resources. The Xueqi army and the Red Lotus group did not see eye to eye. They held each other back. In the end, none of them had a way to conquer Shangyang County. Now, although the people in Shangyang County were living hard, their situation was much better than the refugees outside. Yang Si glanced at Fengjin and said, "Is my lord planning to attack Shangyang County?" After he finished speaking, Fengjin's brows furrowed imperceptibly, as if he disagreed. Jiang Pengji said, "Let's use peaceful means before resorting to force. We have to take it down eventually." Peaceful measures before resorting to violence? This was really strange. Didn't His Majesty like to go to war at the slightest disagreement? Wei Ci was also in a meeting at the government office. He glanced at Fengjin. Jiang Pengji was willing to use peaceful means before resorting to force, mostly because she considered Fengjin's feelings. Fengjin looked at Fengjin with a faint smile and asked Jiang Pengji, "I wonder if my lord has a suitable candidate in mind?" Without waiting for Jiang Pengji to speak, Fengjin stepped forward and said, "Jin is willing to go to Shangyang County." Jiang Pengji nodded in agreement. There was indeed no one more suitable than Fengjin for this matter. If they could take down Shangyang County without fighting, that would be for the best. But if they couldn't get through talking, then they could only resort to violence. Her goal was Shangyang County, and she was determined to get it. If they could take down the entire territory of Wanzhou, it would be bordering Hu County, which was connected to Chongzhou. The Lu family's power would be able to help each other. If they could not take down Shangyang County, it would be equivalent to cutting off a tail. When the time came and they were outflanked, they would be in a passive position. Fengjin also knew the importance of this matter, so he had to think of a way to convince his father at home. Although the county chief of Shangyang County was not a member of the Feng family, he was not far from it. The Feng family's attitude could decide where Shangyang County would go. The power in the north of Dongqing was being reshuffled again. In the south, Prince Changshu and the emperor were also embroiled in a fierce battle. Prince Changshu originally thought that he could use the power of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline to completely conquer Qinzhou. But he didn't expect that the northern borderline, who had promised him, would suddenly stand him up. God knew how long Prince Changshu had been consoling himself before he agreed to the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. If they wanted women, cities, grains, gold and silver, he endured his anger and disgust and agreed, but the 3 tribes of the northern borderline stood him up. I have a sentence, but I don't know if I should say it. When Prince Changshu received the news that the northern borderline had stood him up, he almost vomited blood. There was another matter that worried him even more. They came from Zhangzhou to attack Qinzhou, so along the way, there was a grain team that supplied them with rations. Prince Changshu had long had the intention to betray them, so he had made ample preparations for the war. But no matter how ample he was, he didn't expect Qinzhou to be able to hold out for a year and a half under the attack of his army. Qinzhou could obtain rations locally, but their army had to transport rations from Zhangzhou. Unfortunately, there was a drought this summer, and most of the crops had withered. The grains harvested in autumn were less than 30% of the previous years. The people didn't even have enough for themselves, so how could they pay the heavy grain tax to supply the army? Therefore, Prince Changsho's army was once again faced with a shortage of rations. The rations supplied by the grain team were getting lesser and lesser. In the past, the soldiers would split up twice or even thrice a day. Now they split up once a day, and cooking rice became cooking porridge. If they still couldn't conquer Qinzhou, Prince Changsho would have to bring his troops and scram back to his fief in Zhangzhou. When the emperor recovered and gathered Dongqing's troops to besiege Zhangzhou, it would be the day of Prince Changsho's death. A group of strategists and generals were frowning. Prince Changsho's temper was getting worse by the day. Everyone was frightened and jittery. No, this can't go on. Prince Changsho hadn't slept for 2 days, and he had a pair of dark circles under his eyes. His hundreds of thousands of lions definitely had no problem in terms of combat power. If Yang Si hadn't tricked him before he left, he would already be sitting on the throne and being called, "Long live the Emperor." Why would he be worrying about rations in the military tent? Thinking of Yang Si, who was full of lies, Prince Changsho gnashed his teeth in hatred. At first, he felt guilty towards Yang Si, but later, he realized that this person had caused such a huge trouble for him. He was so angry that he almost vomited blood. The people in Qinzhou also discovered Prince Changsho's predicament of a shortage of rations. They were both happy and worried. Happy. As long as they held out for a while, Prince Changsho would have no choice but to retreat due to a shortage of rations. Worried. Not only was Prince Changsho lacking rations, but there was also a shortage of rations in Qinzhou. Both sides were starving. Now, it was just a matter of who would give up first. If the stalemate continued, both sides could still grind it out, but someone had to interfere at this time. When he heard the news, Prince Changsho was sitting in his tent and throwing a tantrum. A messenger came in from outside and he almost vented his anger on him. The messenger was chased out. The flattering middle-aged strategist was just about to see Prince Changsho. When he saw the anxious messenger outside the tent, he couldn't help but ask. Then, his eyes lit up as he listened. He was so excited that he couldn't control himself. My lord is overjoyed. What's the cause of the joy? Prince Changsho asked impatiently. Chapter 584. The Meng family of Zhangzhou? The 4 noble families of Dongqing were the Feng family of Shangyang, the Wang family of Langjia, the Xie family of Yuning, and the Meng family of Zhangzhou. The Feng family of Shangyang were mostly upright, and the number of troops they had was no more than 3,000 to 4,000. The Wang family of Langjia was also an upright and noble family. More than 10 years ago, they went into seclusion and disappeared without a trace. Their clansmen rarely showed themselves outside. The Xie family of Gongning were mostly talented in both literature and martial arts. They had been noble since the Xia dynasty. Only the Meng family of Zhangzhou held a large number of troops and was trusted by the emperor. The house of the Count of Zhenbei had great merits and had been weakened by the Dongqing emperor using various methods to seize their military power. A few years ago, the house of the Count of Zhenbei had led troops to aid the Nanxing kingdom. However, the military supervisor had a grudge against the house of the Count of Zhenbei, resulting in heavy casualties among the troops. Today, the house of the Count of Zhenbei had long fallen into dire straits. In order to stabilize the situation at the border, the emperor put the Meng family of Zhangzhou in an important position, which made the powerful Meng family of Zhangzhou even more arrogant and insufferably arrogant. How arrogant were they? A few years ago, when the people in Zhangzhou were in chaos, the emperor did not reprimand the Meng family. Instead, he allowed them to kill the rioters and fight violence with violence. Logically speaking, the Meng family of Zhangzhou should be the #1 confidant of the emperor. Why would they come here? Prince Changsho used what was left of his brain to ponder for a while. The anger in his heart subsided slightly. He tidied up his appearance and sat on the seat of honor. Hurry and welcome the emissary. The middle-aged strategist answered flatteringly. Not long after, the sound of clothes rubbing against each other could be heard from outside. The footsteps sounded a little hurried. The door curtain was lifted, and a man with an ordinary face walked in. He looked so ordinary that if he was thrown into a sea of people, he would be lost. His clothes were patched with many patches. Prince Changsho pretended to be deep in thought and put on airs for a while. After a while he asked, "Tell me, what is the Meng family's motive?" As the saying goes, those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. After Prince Changsho was tricked by Yang Si, he would no longer easily believe the words of scholars. The Mengs of Zhongzhou were the confidants of the Emperor of Dongqing. All the children in Dongqing knew about this. Would Prince Chongshou believe that the Meng family of Zhongzhou suddenly betrayed them? The Meng family's messenger bowed respectfully and said in a hoarse voice, "Your Highness, as the saying goes, an honest man does not resort to insinuations. I will not deliberately keep you in suspense. My master wishes to discuss the world affairs with Prince. I wonder if Prince is interested in sitting down and having a detailed discussion?" Prince Chongshou's heart skipped a beat and a mocking look appeared on his face. Why were there always people in the world who treated him like a fool and deceived him? He said harshly, "Who in this world doesn't know that your master is my good second brother's loyal dog? Who would believe your words?" The Meng family's emissary's expression changed drastically. Nowadays, the aristocratic families were powerful. Even if the four noble families retired one after another, the entire political situation of Dongqing was still in the hands of the aristocratic families. The emperor and the royal family were more like puppets in the hands of the aristocratic families. Not only did Prince Chongshou not treat him with courtesy, but he also called the Meng family the emperor's lackeys. It was infuriating. However, the Meng's emissary was here on a mission. Naturally, he would not fall out with them easily. His heart sank, and he said, "As the saying goes, a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in, and a virtuous minister chooses a master to serve. My master wants to discuss important matters with your Highness, so he naturally thinks highly of you. The emperor is muddle-headed. Now the northern borderline is watching covetously from the outside, and there are traitors inside who are causing trouble for the people. Instead of making progress, he indulges in sensual pleasures, killing loyal ministers, virtuous ministers, and good ministers, and allowing traitors to control the court. Such a muddle-headed person is definitely not the emperor." Prince Chongshou sat at the seat of honor and listened. At first, he was a little careless, but as the Meng's emissary continued, he gradually became moved. Could it be that the Mengs of Zhongzhou were really planning to abandon darkness for light and help him ascend the throne? But why would the Mengs help him? It must be because he had something to gain from an aristocratic family that pursued fame and wealth. What Prince Chongshou could give to the Mengs, could the Emperor of Dongqing not? No matter how the people outside cursed the Emperor for being muddle-headed and incompetent, he was still the legitimate Emperor, while Prince Chongshou was a traitor who wanted to force the Emperor to abdicate and rebel in the name of purging the Emperor. Or could it be that the Mengs of Zhongzhou were no longer as glorious as before, and wanted to seek merit to help the Emperor? Prince Chongshou's eyes flickered, and he was faintly moved. A straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. Your master isn't someone who likes to suffer losses. What benefits does he get by helping me overthrow the Emperor? Merit to help the Emperor? No matter how great the merit was, could it help the Mengs of Zhongzhou advance? The god of war, Meng Jing, was the ancestor of the Mengs. He paved the way for his descendants, allowing the Mengs to flourish until today. What kind of place was the stud farm that bred war horses? It was a national treasure, but the emperor had handed the stud farm of Dongqing, Zhongzhou, to the Mengs. What kind of trust was that? What kind of glory was that? Even if the Mengs had merit to help the emperor, they couldn't advance further, unless Prince Chongshou gave up the throne that he was about to obtain. Thinking of this, the joy in Prince Chongshou's heart vanished, and he became even more vigilant against the emissary of the Mengs. The emissary of the Mengs said, "My master doesn't have any evil intentions. He just wants to help your Highness get back what belongs to you. Of course, if you're willing to give the heads of the Lus to my master after this is done, that would be the best." Prince Chongshou was shocked. The heads of the Lus? The Mengs of Zhongzhou had turned to him, and their ultimate goal was to destroy the Lus? Did the Mengs and the Lus have a deep grudge against each other? The emissary said arrogantly, "It is the Lus of Hejian." Prince Chongshou's heart was pounding, and he asked, "The Lus of Hejian? Do you mean the Lus of Chongzhou's magistrate Lu Shi?" The emissary asked in return, "Other than the Lus in Hejian, are there any other branches?" It looked like they were targeting Lu Shi and the others. Prince Chongshou's heart settled, and he asked in confusion, "Your master is willing to help me because of the heads of the Lus? What did the Lus do to the Mengs of Zhongzhou that they had such a deep grudge against each other?" "Of course." The emissary maintained his arrogance. "If your Highness doesn't believe me, you can pretend that this discussion never happened. In order to defend Qinzhou, the Emperor of Dongqing borrowed troops from the Mengs of Zhongzhou and issued 19 edicts. The leader of the Mengs, Meng Zhan, agreed to send troops and transfer military power, but he had a condition. After defeating Prince Changshu, the imperial family had to pay with the heads of the Lus. Unfortunately, the emperor had an influential imperial noble consort Hui Jun by his side. The emperor tricked the Meng's 20,000 troops into coming over, but he was vague about the Meng's request. Meng Zhan then sent the emissary to make a deal with Prince Changshu. Prince Changshu's intuition told him that this was an opportunity for him to get close to the throne. However, he still wanted to know the grudge between the Mengs and the Lus. Only by understanding this could he judge the sincerity of the Mengs. It was a pity that the emissary refused to say anything. He was like a gourd with its mouth cut off, and his lips were tightly sealed. Prince Changshu could only agree on the surface to calm the emissary, and secretly send his subordinates to investigate the grudge between the two clans. Chapter 585. The Mengs and the Lus didn't have a grudge? Of course there was, and it was an irreconcilable grudge. When Meng Liang died, Meng Zhan saw him die. He vomited blood several times. After the funeral, he fell ill and was bedridden. When he finally recovered, he felt that Meng Liang's death was very strange. He knew Meng Hun very well. Even though he was promoted to the county military officer of Meng County, Meng Hun never changed. He was honest and didn't have the ability to set up a trap, not to mention provoking him several times with the word bitch in his words. Not only that, but the ambush also required a lot of manpower. When Meng Hun escaped from Meng County, he brought a lot of people with him, but they were all defeated soldiers. Along the way, some died and some were injured. How could they have the ability to annihilate the elites of the Meng family? When Meng Zhan was recuperating, he thought it was not that simple. There must be a mastermind behind Meng Hun. Just as he recovered from his illness, he sent someone to Hejian County to investigate carefully. But Meng County in Song Prefecture was very far from Hejian County. It was too slow to send information back and forth every month. By the time Meng Zhan shifted his suspicion to Lu Shi had already become the general evaluation officer in Shangjing. He had stepped down from his position as the county chief of Hu County and was promoted to the Chongzhou magistrate. Right after the evaluation ended, he immediately took up his post and went to the border of Dongqing. One in the south and the other in the north. What about Meng Hun? Meng Hun had already taken thousands of troops to Chongzhou to avoid trouble. He just missed the Meng spies. Meng Zhan wanted to attack the Lus to test Lu Shi's reaction. After all, he had no evidence to prove that Lu Shi was the culprit behind Meng Hun's murder. But the Lus in Hejian only had ordinary people. Most importantly, Lu Shi was in Chongzhou and his son was studying in Langya County. Coincidentally, the emperor had suppressed the house of Count Zhenbei. The empty military power needed a confidant. The Mengs became the best choice. It also diverted Meng Zhan's attention. Until half a year ago, Meng Zhan received news that there was a fierce general in Fengyi County named Meng Hun who led the army to attack Maolin County. Meng Hun? He wasn't dead? Meng Zhan acted as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He quickly sent people to investigate. It took a few days before he finally found something. Meng Hun was still the same Meng Hun. He used to be the commandant of Meng County, but now he was the commandant of Lu Shi's vanguard battalion. Who was Lu Shi? He was Lu Shi's only son. Who was Meng Hun? The culprit who killed Meng Liang, toyed with Cangzhou, and swindled the grain. With the two of them together, Meng Zhan didn't need any evidence to conclude that the culprit behind Meng Liang's murder was Lu Shi. It had been 4 or 5 years, and he could not forget his son's murder. Whenever he thought of his precious son being bled to death and his corpse lying in a cold coffin, he could not let go of his hatred. Although he and Lu Shi had an affair, how could he be so cruel as to kill Meng Liang? Meng Liang was as important to Meng Zhan as Lu Shi was to Lu Shi. The hatred of his son's murder was absolutely irreconcilable. Meng Zhan originally wanted to stay away from the war between the emperor and Prince Changshu, but now he wanted to get involved. He wanted to use this as a bargaining chip to help one side win the war. Then he could attack Lu Shi's entire family. Who knew that the emperor would secretly be bewitched by the concubine even though he had promised? Meng Zhan had no choice but to change his target. He gave up on the emperor and turned to work with Prince Changshu. Lu Shi killed his son, so he wanted to destroy the entire Lu family. The innocent Xueqi took the blame for Jiang Pengji. But the Mengs were not the only ones who were harmed by Jiang Pengji. Far away in the northern borderline, another storm was brewing. The king of the imperial court was the king of the northern borderline. He had killed his way out of the ordinary royal family and became the king of the northern borderline. He had some tricks up his sleeve. The loss of the horse farm could not be recovered. The large number of dead horses was heart-wrenching. But the most important thing now was to find a way to stabilize the situation and reduce the losses of the tribes and herdsmen. When it came to making up for the losses, money was a must. When it came to money, the managers of the northern borderline all turned pale. In order to resist the foreign merchants and protect the interests of the northern borderline, the king of the imperial court, under the advice of the wise man Wu Liba, formed a business alliance. It not only helped each other but also increased the competitiveness of local businesses. However, there were benefits to an alliance of merchant companies, and naturally, there were certain disadvantages. They saw the value of the colored glass of the heavenly palace. After observing for a while, they united and annexed the stock of Xueqi's treasure house. They were ready to learn from Xueqi's methods of waiting to be valued and hunger marketing. They wanted to maximize the rarity of the colored glass of the heavenly palace. But before they could make much money, the horse plague broke out. Then there was the tragic death of the horses and the loss of the horse farm. Now, they needed real money to make up for the losses. They were shocked to find that the gold, silver and copper coins they had were less than a quarter of what they usually had. The northern borderline was indeed rich, but most of their money came from various shops, horse farms, war horses, stallions, pony caravans, and precious goods. If these things were converted into gold, silver, and jewelry, the northern borderline's business would be as rich as a country. But when it came to real money, clap, clap, clap. Where's the money? Did someone embezzle it? The head manager slammed the table. He was so angry that his beard was about to fly off. The junior manager trembled and stammered, "I wouldn't dare to do that even if I had 10 guts." The head manager was so angry that he snatched the accounts from the other party and read them quickly. The accounts were all correct, but where did the money of their business go? Reading to the end, the head manager's face turned green and he said helplessly, "Think of a way to sell the colored glass of the heavenly palace," the junior manager hurriedly said. But, the head manager interrupted him, "No buts. The most important thing now is to take out a sum of money. The people at the top need it." Everyone knew that the colored glass of the heavenly palace was extremely precious. Gold and precious stones didn't dare to compete with it. In a few years, it might be even more expensive. After all, they had cheated Xueqi at 30% of the price. Even if they sold it at the original market price, they would still make a profit. Not only would they not lose money, but they could also make a lot of money. Everyone knew the reason, but they didn't have enough time. They couldn't wait. They had no choice but to sell the colored glass of the heavenly palace in exchange for real money. At this time, they discovered a very embarrassing thing. Most of the ladies in the northern borderline were of noble birth. Most of the businesses were run by these ladies' maiden families. When they bought the colored glass of the heavenly palace, they didn't give them gold, silver, or jewelry at all. Instead, they recorded it, owed it, took it directly. What's more, they said they were buying it with money, but they directly used the business's money to pay for it. What was the difference between this and putting money in one's left pocket into one's right pocket? Among them, Wu Liba's wife was the most generous. She bought 10 sets of jewelry in one go. However, the business didn't get a single cent. Instead, they got a stack of promissory notes. Chapter 586. What should we do? Seeing the priceless colored glass of the heavenly palace, sold one set after another, but the amount of money they got back was very little. The loophole in the accounts was getting bigger and bigger. The junior manager almost wanted to cry but had no tears. Who didn't know what those rich ladies were like? The merchant alliance was half public and half private. However, to these noble ladies who came from powerful families, it was completely their private property. They would just give some money or write an IOU, which was considered polite. If they didn't stand on ceremony, they would directly ask for it. With the items in the hands of these women, the junior manager didn't even need to think to know that those IOUs couldn't be turned into money. The little steward was extremely worried and told this matter to the chief steward. The chief manager was also full of lawsuits and was in a dilemma. His sister also bought a few sets of colored glass of the Heavenly Palace on credit. He secretly told his sister about it, but she didn't care at all. The chief manager couldn't do anything about it. The rich ladies of the northern borderline were favored. Even if they were married, they still had a high status in their family. These women didn't hesitate to spend money and were even more diligent in taking their own things. The financial loophole of the business was getting bigger and bigger. The junior manager was so worried that his hair was about to turn white. He muttered and complained, "These women are willing to pay for Xueqi. I've never seen them write IOUs in the past. Why are they all taking it for free now? They're really not polite," the chief manager said impatiently. Xueqi is a businessman from Dongqing. He does business according to the rule of cash and goods. You can't get the goods if you don't pay, but the business is the family of these women. When have you ever seen the Chow family pay their bills properly? The junior manager shrank his neck and said in horror, "But this isn't a solution. If the colored glass of the Heavenly Palace was divided up by these rich ladies, the business would have to pay a large sum of money. If this financial loophole wasn't closed, when the higher-ups checked the accounts, no one could afford to bear the consequences." With no other choice, the chief manager could only think of a solution that wasn't really a solution. On the surface, they said that the colored glass of the Heavenly Palace had been sold out, but in private, they sold it at a lower price than the average price to a noblewoman of a slightly lower status. These noblewomen all had one thing in common. Their maiden families were not involved in the business, or their status in the business was not high. Even though they were selling at a low price, the price they set was still more than double the original price of the purchase. There were many rich ladies in the northern borderline. In the past, the colored glass of the Heavenly Palace was almost monopolized by the first-class ladies. Others couldn't buy it even if they wanted to. But now, there was illegal goods delivered to their doorstep. The price was also reasonable, far lower than the highest value in their hearts, so they bought it with a wave of their hands. Thus, the firm successfully sold a batch of colored glass of the Heavenly Palace and made a lot of money every day. If everything went smoothly, when all the inventory was sold, the financial hole could be closed. Unfortunately, things didn't go according to one's wishes. Just as the situation was looking good, something happened to the prodigal woman at home. It all started at a banquet. The azure glass of the Heavenly Palace had almost become the standard for the high-class ladies of the northern borderline. It symbolized great wealth and power. Every time they went out to meet guests, they had to wear a set. When they found out that the firm also had a lot of colored glass of the Heavenly Palace, they couldn't contain their joy and changed a set every day. This banquet was no exception. The three tribes of the northern borderline had a strict racial division. There was a clear hierarchy among them, and no one was allowed to overstep their authority. Wu Liba's wife was undoubtedly the cream of the crop among all the ladies. As the first lady, what she hated the most were those pretentious Central Plains women and those female slaves who used their looks to please others. No one would have thought that she would disregard her bearing and directly scratch the beautiful face of a certain noble's beloved concubine. The concubine was originally sitting in a remote corner talking to someone. When Wu Liba's wife came up to hit her, she didn't even react. Who let a lowly female slave wear the colored glass of the Heavenly Palace? With a body of lowly flesh, do you think you deserve it? Wu Liba's wife grabbed all the jewelry off the concubine's head and ruthlessly threw them on the ground. Glass shards fell all over the ground, and those who were close by were even bounced off. They were so frightened that they subconsciously distanced themselves. After hearing Wu Liba's wife's words, the ladies finally understood what had happened. A female slave's concubine actually dared to wear the same precious, colored glass of the Heavenly Palace as them? The ladies were furious, but Wu Liba's wife had already gone forward to whip someone, so they didn't interfere. The concubine was also beaten senseless. Wu Liba's wife grabbed her long hair and pressed her to the ground. Her tender face was pressed against the ground, and beads of blood appeared. She was filled with regret. If she had known this would happen, she wouldn't have worn that precious headgear to show off. Who knew that the women of the northern borderline would be so shrewish and unreasonable? They even dared to hit someone at a banquet hosted by the eldest princess. The one who did it was Wu Liba's wife. Her maiden family was powerful, and her husband's family was extremely powerful. This matter was easily brushed off. As for the concubine who was violently beaten, she was really sorry. She was beaten for no reason, and the concubine's husband didn't even say anything. However, this matter didn't end so easily. How could the group of ladies let it go? How could a female slave's concubine have the wealth to wear the expensive colored glass of the heavenly palace? Especially the wife of the concubine's husband. When she returned home, she almost flipped the whole house upside down. After investigating, they found out that the colored glass of the heavenly palace was sold at half the normal price, and all of them were sold by the trading company. At this moment, the ladies were completely in an uproar. The business that had just taken a turn for the better was instantly cut off again. The chief steward of the trading company was so angry that his teeth itched. Helpless, they could only find another way out. They prepared to sell the colored glass of the heavenly palace to Dongqing. The business in the northern borderline could no longer continue. However, this year, the northern borderline seemed to be unlucky. The trading company had just negotiated a deal, but the traffickers who smuggled it to Dongqing refused to do it. Business has business principles. To go back on one's word like this? The chief steward resisted the urge to vomit blood and patiently negotiated with his business partner. The other party laughed coldly and said mockingly, "The merchants in the northern borderline often mock the merchants in the Central Plains for being scheming and dishonest in doing business. They boast that they believe in business, but from what I can see, it doesn't seem like much. This so-called colored glass of the heavenly palace is just a cheap item made of gravel. If I hadn't received the news in time, by the time this deal was done, my family would have been forced into a desperate situation." What? A cheap item made of gravel? The chief steward was flustered and exasperated. The colored glass of the heavenly palace in his hands was the real deal. The business deal fell through. The chief steward turned around and felt that something was amiss. He hurriedly sent someone to investigate the situation. The information he received made him dizzy and his brain went blank for a moment. His vision turned black. His brain felt heavy and he fell to the ground, unconscious. The so-called colored glass of the heavenly palace was just a very common glass product in Zhongzhou. Chapter 587. The head steward fainted from anger. Little did he know that Gu Xian also wanted to explode on the spot. He knelt in front of Jiang Pengji, his eyes filled with guilt. He carried a thorn branch on his back and asked for her forgiveness. Jiang Pengji forcefully helped him up. Her expression was the same as usual. "Uncle Gu, what are you doing? Get up. Do you want to shorten my lifespan?" Gu Xian seemed to have aged a lot overnight. He could not dissuade Jiang Pengji and could only sit down with a face full of guilt. Feng Jin and the rest were all present. Most of them had seen Gu Xian before and knew how much he had contributed to Xiangyang County. They were very respectful towards him. "Mr. Gu, what happened on the road? Why are you?" He immediately offered a humble apology. It was as if he hadn't washed himself for many days. He looked extremely disheveled. Where was his calm demeanor from before? Gu Xian replied, "Your servant has failed to live up to Master's trust and carelessly messed up the task that Master has entrusted me with." "Messed up?" Jiang Pengji furrowed her brows and asked in a deep voice, "Uncle Gu, what happened?" Gu Xian furrowed his brows and said, "According to the Master's instructions, I brought all kinds of colored glass objects to Zhongzhou to seek new business. At first, it was still all right, but after a while, it was as if a demonic wind was blowing in Zhongzhou. Glass of all colors filled the streets. Initially, it was sold at an extremely high price, but because there were too many merchants selling it, the price dropped from tens of thousands of coins to a few hundred coins. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed. Xueqi was so shocked that he bit his tongue. Didn't Fengyi County rely on the rare glass to have such a large fortune? Now that the price of the glass had dropped from tens of thousands of coins to a few hundred coins, and it seemed like the price would continue to drop, they wouldn't be able to make any profit. Xueqi was in charge of Jiang Pengji's private treasury, so he was the clearest about it. The others also knew that Fengyi County was so rich that it could not be separated from glass. The viewers in the live broadcast room were in an uproar. According to Gu Xian's description, there was something fishy going on here. Little Angel is the cutest. What the F***CK? What kind of strategy is this? 520. #PickNose. What else could it be? There must be a traitor. So far, Only the streamer here has perfected the art of making glass. Zhongzhao is far away. How could they have such a tacit understanding and come up with so many glass products? I love you. A traitor? However, as you can see, the host is very protective of the glass manufacturing technology. Inside and outside, it was completely covered. The host also had a pair of fiery eyes. They had been buying glass for a whole year. How did the secret get leaked? Jin Tian Shuanging. It's highly possible that there's a traitor, but I think it's more likely that there's another woman from another world. As you can see, it's Zhongzhao again. The 4 self-accomplishment classics for women appeared before Zhongzhao. It was exactly the same as the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women in ancient China. Now there was glass. If you say that there are no traces of a transmigrated woman, I wouldn't believe it even if you beat me to death. Gue Kai Gua Feng Shao. Based on Jia's analysis, other than the traitor and the time traveler, there is another unlikely possibility. Perhaps someone accidentally burned the pottery and got glass. However, the possibility of this happening was too low. Even if they managed to burn it, the technology wasn't that mature. In Yuejia Zhuge Qinma. To the one above, are you shameless? How dare you call yourself Jia? Why don't you call yourself F*CK? There was a lot of discussion in the streaming room. Not only were they curious about the truth behind the incident, but they were also worried about Jiang Pengji. Cutting off one's source of wealth was akin to killing one's parents. Jiang Pengji had relied on glass products to swindle more than 20 million strings of coins from the northern borderline. If not for this incident, she might have been able to swindle tens of millions of strings of coins from Zhongzhao. She wouldn't have to worry about money when she conquered the world in the future. Now that her source of wealth had been cut off, how could she not be angry? In reality, Jiang Pengji hadn't really shipped the goods. Compared to their loss of composure, she had a calm expression that said, "So that's how it is." She smiled and opened her mouth helplessly. Uncle Gu can't be blamed for this. Do you think that the method of making glass was leaked because of you? Gu Xian was astonished. Everyone present thought of a possibility. A traitor. Glass was too profitable. Who wouldn't be jealous? Burning a handful of sand could turn the situation around and earn tens of thousands of strings of coins. The profits were shocking. Gu Xian pondered who the traitor was while feeling extremely ashamed. There might be a traitor, but it shouldn't be her. Because the timing didn't match. Jiang Pengji was very certain and didn't suspect it. Even though there was no evidence, she already understood what was going on. In this world, Jiang Pengji wasn't the only one who had the ability to make glass. Everyone looked at each other. Did the Lord mean that she already knew there was a traitor, but she pretended not to know? Then my lord. Without the glass business, what should they do? It doesn't matter. From this we can see how stupid the person behind this is. What's there to be afraid of? Jiang Pengji smiled contemptuously. She didn't take the so-called enemy seriously at all. Gu Xian was a merchant. He calmed down and thought about the overflowing glass in Zhongzhao. He couldn't help but shake his head. It was indeed stupid. The owner is right. Glass is cheap, but it's expensive when it's rare. Few people in the world know how it's made. If the production and sales are strictly controlled, even if there's only one kiln, one can easily become the richest person in the world. It's not a pipe dream to be rich enough to rival a country. That person is short-sighted and didn't protect the method of making glass. Instead, the kiln is overflowing. It's really stupid. Gu Xian witnessed with his own eyes the price of glass in Zhongzhao plummet from tens of thousands of strings of coins. One could imagine that the person who made the first kiln also wanted to make money, but he didn't have the foresight and didn't know the greedy nature of merchants. Such a huge profit was enough for people to gamble with their lives. It was also because of the profit that the glass in Zhongzhao was overflowing. Fortunately, Gu Xian saw that the situation wasn't good. He sold all the glass in his hands at a price lower than the market price and hurried back to Xiangyang district with the money. Don't be fooled by his sorry state. In fact, he earned more than 3 million strings of coins. He specialized in cheating the big merchants of Zhongzhao. Compared to a merchant boss like Gu Xian, how could those opportunistic merchants be a match for him? Gu Xian saw that the situation wasn't good, so he sold and left. He earned the last sum of money. The merchant who took over thought that he had made a fortune, but he was stunned when he turned around. Xueqi and the rest looked at Zhang Pengji with admiration. They asked themselves honestly. If their source of wealth was forcefully cut off, they wouldn't just faint, but they would be furious. Their lord was good. She was calm and composed and even had the time to mock the enemy behind her. But my lord, if you lose this source of wealth, as the housekeeper, Xueqi felt the most heartache. It doesn't matter. Anyway, the private treasury has enough money. If the public treasury lacks it, just claim it. There wasn't much money in the public treasury. She had always used her private purse to replenish it. Zhang Pengji said with a smile. On the contrary, Zhongzhao, after this torment, I'm afraid it's going to run out of luck. The whole nation's kiln was frantically trying to make money. The more glass there was, the lower the price. The first to eat the cake would earn a lot, but those who followed the trend would be out of luck. The situation in Zhongzhao was already unstable. The chaos caused by the clique was brutal. The lives of the people were getting more and more difficult. Many people saw glass as a good way to get rich and escape poverty. Naturally, they would madly follow the trend. Chapter 588. For the audience in the streaming room, glass was something that could be seen everywhere in their daily lives. For the merchants and citizens of Zhongzhao, they only saw the low cost and high selling price of glass. They could not see the other aspects. Admittedly, the raw material of glass was worthless mud and gravel. After burning, it could be sold for tens of thousands of strings of coins. There was a profit difference of tens of millions of times, but was it that easy to earn this money? Without qualified technology and firing environment, there were too many substandard products and too few qualified products. Even for Zhang Pengji, the craftsmen had experienced hundreds of failures before they perfected it bit by bit. The success rate was still not high. She could afford to squander money. After all, the main job of the kiln was to fire bricks. Glass was just a side job. If it succeeded, then so be it. If not, then forget it. What about the merchants and commoners who had invested all their money into the glass business? How many failures would they have to go through if they wanted to burn qualified glass? Building a kiln required money and firing required fuel. Many families could not afford to burn coal in winter. How could they burn kilns after kilns of glass? Admittedly, if there was one qualified product out of 10,000 failed products, they would make a profit. But could they afford to squander money like that? By the time they fired one qualified glass, the merchants outside would have already fired tens of thousands of pieces. Glass was worthless. Zhang Pengji could imagine the crazy scene of glass burning in Zhongzhao. But how many people could profit from it? There were very few. Did anyone make money? Definitely. The ones who made money were the first batch of people to produce the glass and the big businessmen who invested in it later. The former had the upper hand and made steady profits, while the latter had the manpower and financial resources to sell the glass before its price dropped and avoid losses. As for the citizens and small merchants who followed the trend, they did not have the upper hand and did not have enough financial resources. In the end, they would lose everything and not even their underwear. As for Xueqi's foresight and decisiveness to leave early when he saw that the situation was not good, Zhang Pengji was very pleased. If it was someone else, they might not have earned the last 3 million strings of coins after a slight hesitation. After comforting Xueqi, Zhang Pengji was about to leave. Xueqi's eyes flickered. He got up and followed her. When they reached an empty corridor, Zhang Pengji turned her head and asked, "What's wrong?" Xueqi's expression was slightly hesitant as he asked, "My lord, is it really not the work of a traitor that leaked the method of making glass?" He was a meticulous and intelligent person. Although he did not have a strong presence, none of Zhang Pengji's subordinates dared to look down on him. Zhang Pengji said, "It shouldn't be her. There wasn't enough time. I was more inclined to believe that there was someone who also knew how to make it. Seeing that I had earned a lot of money in the northern frontier, they were envious and followed suit. However, that person was too stupid and couldn't control his subordinates well. Instead, a loophole was exploited and the method of manufacturing glass became popular. The profits inside are too high. It's worth it to bet everything on it." Xueqi said disapprovingly, "My lord, forgive me for disagreeing. You are not what you used to be. You should be more careful. You clearly know that the traitor is plotting against you. Even if you don't eliminate her completely, You should send someone to keep an eye on her at all times to prevent her from playing tricks in the dark. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, Wenjing, I understand this logic. But I can't do that. Qiguan Rang was surprised. Why? Jiang Pengji was silent for a while and said, It's just because she's not an ordinary traitor. She's a two-faced traitor. Qiguan Rang's expression changed. A two-faced traitor? She nodded and said with certainty, The master behind her isn't the real master. There's someone else. As for who it is, I have some clues now. It's precisely because of this that I can't touch her easily. I just want to know what that person wants to do. Qiguan Rang sighed. He completely agreed with Feng Jin's judgment of Jiang Pengji. This person's gambler mentality was too serious. To put it nicely, she was bold. If she was careless and failed miserably, there would be a good show to watch. A gentleman doesn't stand under a collapsing wall. If something happens to you, it's not only related to your life, but also those who follow you. When Jiang Pengji heard this, she suddenly smiled and said teasingly, Maybe. But Wenjing, I can only be safe if I keep this traitor alive. If something happens to the traitor, it will raise the vigilance of the master behind her. I'm afraid I'll have to live with assassinations every day. I'm not afraid of killing people, but if I accidentally hurt the people around me, that's not what I want to see. The more she said this, the more curious Qiguan Rang was about the master behind Takshu. Jiang Pengji said, Wenjing, come closer. I have something I need your help with. Ask Master Wei Yuan in secret. Wei Yuan was Qiguan Rang's father-in-law. He used to teach Lu Shi. He was a tutor hired by the Lu residents with a high salary. Qiguan Rang obeyed. Jiang Pengji used a special method to force her voice into a line and whispered to Qiguan Rang. No one knew what she said to Qiguan Rang, but his expression first changed from doubt to confusion, and finally to shock. My lord you, Jiang Pengji said. Do it secretly. Only you and I know about this. You must be careful. Qiguan Rang swallowed nervously. His Adam's apple moved. He was almost 30 years old, and it had been a long time since he lost his composure. You suspect that the murderer behind the traitor is that person? Jiang Pengji smiled. Her eyes were cold. I don't want to suspect, but let's take one step at a time. The two of them talked in low voices. Qiguan Rang almost floated away from the long corridor. Jiang Pengji looked sideways at the corner at the end of the corridor. A piece of cloth disappeared from sight. The audience in the streaming room was even more confused. They purposely increased the volume, but they still couldn't hear what Jiang Pengji and Qiguan Rang said. Rensha Wangka. There was a problem in the streaming room just now. I didn't hear the streamer speak. Rensha Qian Duo. It's a cross-dimensional streaming. It's normal for the signal to be bad. Host V. It's just a small trick to force the voice into a line. Even if she imprisoned the system, it was still a subsystem. She didn't know where the system itself was hiding. To be on the safe side, she wouldn't simply talk about certain things during the streaming. Qiguan Rang calmed his wildly beating heart and thought about how to complete Jiang Pengji's task. My lord, I finally found you. Jiang Pengji waited for a while. Xueqi came over with a stack of account books. His face was full of joy. She asked, When you walked over from that direction just now, did you see anyone with a strange expression? Xueqi didn't understand. He thought about it and said, Just now. I saw Zixiao walking in a hurry. He seemed absent-minded. He was probably not feeling well. Jiang Pengji frowned. It was indeed Wei Ci. She didn't know what this guy was thinking. Chapter 589. Jiang Pengji planned to conquer all of Wanzhou, and Shangyang County was a place that she could not avoid. Feng Jin volunteered to be her lobbyist, and Jiang Pengji sent hundreds of elites to escort him. It was the beginning of winter, and there was no war in the north. Feng Jin planned to take the opportunity to persuade his parents. If it was successful, they only needed to concentrate their forces to attack Chengde County in the spring of the following year. Wei Jingxian carried Chongxing, who was more than a year old, and followed her husband Feng Jin into the carriage. The servants and luggage also took up 3 carriages. Although Chongxing was young, she was lively and energetic, and her speech was clear and organized. The small carriage was not enough for her to move around, and she soon got tired of it. She was held in Wei Jingxian's arms with an aggrieved expression. She pouted, like a vegetable that had been exposed to the sun on a summer afternoon. "Daddy, hug!" Seeing Feng Jin enter the carriage, Chongqing's black grape-like eyes lit up. She rushed to his two white and plump arms that were like lotus roots. "Okay, Daddy is hugging Chongqing. Is this position okay? Don't jump around. Daddy's old bones can't withstand your torment." Feng Jin smiled as he hugged Chongqing. The little girl stood on his lap and bounced around. She was having fun on her own. He played with her for a while, and his back was sweating from exhaustion. His daughter was still full of energy, and he could not help but secretly complain. Wei Jingxian noticed his embarrassment and took the initiative to carry the naughty Chongqing over. "You spoil Chongqing so much that she doesn't sit or stand properly. When we go to Shangyang County and meet father-in-law and mother-in-law, it won't be good if Chongqing makes a fool of herself in front of them." Feng Jin smiled and said, "Chongqing has a sweet mouth and is the best at coaxing people. Father and mother love her so much, how can they not like her? Moreover, she has been born for a year and a half, and they have not seen her yet. Even if Chongqing makes a fuss, they won't be angry." As the saying goes, a generation apart, the elders not only liked obedient juniors, but they also liked those who were sweet, lively, and not rude. Moreover, Chongqing was the only girl in the third generation of the direct line of descent. Based on this uniqueness, there was no reason for her parents not to like her. Yes, Chongqing has a sweet mouth. Chongqing could not understand her parents' words, but she could understand her own name. She learned in a daze, her hands holding a sweet pastry and nibbling on it. Feng Jin raised his eyebrows at Wei Jingxian with an expression that said, "I didn't say anything wrong, did I?" Wei Jingxian pursed her lips and smiled. There was quite a distance between Fengyi County and Shangyang County. Along the way, there were mobs who were scantily clad and starving. The further they went from Fengyi County, the more difficult the lives of the people outside became. Dilapidated buildings could be seen everywhere. It had been a year and a half since the earthquake in Shangjing, but the people's lives had not improved. The Tsing-Yi army and the Red Lotus group were wreaking havoc in the north. The people either conspired with them or were exploited and robbed by them. Spring plowing and autumn harvesting could not be carried out normally. Many villages were deserted and overgrown with weeds. They looked desolate and deserted. Feng Jin walked on the main road, trying his best to avoid sleeping in such places. He was a young man and his young energy was flourishing. However, Chongqing was still young and could not be affected by the Yin wind. Under the protection of elite soldiers, Feng Jin and his wife set foot on the long-awaited Shangyang County. Due to the Feng family, the city walls of Shangyang County were tall. To avoid Shangjing, the city walls were slightly lower than Shangjing. Even though the city walls were tall and sturdy, after the earthquake in Shangjing and several military disasters, there were indelible marks on the city walls. Feng Jin spent a lot of effort to prove his identity. He, his wife, their maids and servants could enter the city. However, if the hundreds of soldiers wanted to enter the city, they had to surrender their weapons. To solve this problem, Feng Jin could only carry Chongqing and wait for the Feng family's housekeeper to come and negotiate. He thought that when his parents received the news, they would at most send a housekeeper. He did not expect the person to be his eldest brother. Feng Gue, the eldest son of the Feng family, was 25 years old. Eldest brother. The elegant youth saw Feng Jin, who was carrying a child, standing outside the city. He almost did not recognize him as his second brother. "Why you are finally back." Feng Gue was emotional. His pace was slightly faster than usual, but it did not seem disorderly. Wei Jingxian took the initiative to carry Chongqing to prevent her from disturbing the Feng brothers' reunion. After they exchanged greetings, she brought Chongqing with her to greet Feng Gue. Feng Gue had received news that Feng Jin had brought his wife and daughter back to visit his family. When he saw the fair and plump Chongqing, who looked very spirited, his impression of her soared. "Is this my eldest niece? She looks like my younger sister-in-law." Wei Jingxian taught Chongqing to call Feng Gue eldest uncle. Chongqing gave him face and addressed him clearly. She raised her arms to give him a hug. Feng Gue was used to seeing shy and bashful children, such as his two sons. He had never seen someone as warm and fearless as Chongqing. He was so happy that he reached out to hug her. Chongqing was a good girl. In front of everyone, she gave her eldest uncle 2 kisses on both sides of his cheeks. When Feng Jin saw this, his expression did not look too good. Feng Gue was stunned at first. Then, he smiled warmly and said, Miss Huayu is not afraid of strangers. She is quick-witted and intelligent. This is not the place to reminisce. Huayu, bring your sister-in-law and eldest niece into the city quickly. Your parents are still waiting for you. Feng Jin looked hesitantly at the guards behind him. Feng Gue understood and sent someone to inform the guards at the city gate. After entering the city, Feng Jin's eyes dimmed slightly. Compared to the scenery outside of Shangyang County, the lives of the people in the city were considered stable. However, compared to the prosperous scene in his memory, not only had the population declined, the buildings in the city also exuded a sense of decadence and desolation. Many of the buildings had been patched up and looked slightly dilapidated. After the earthquake last year, was everything all right at home? Feng Jin asked. Feng Gue carried his eldest niece, who was slightly heavy, and replied, Everything is fine at home. It's just that the people of Shangyang County have suffered. Outside, there are 2 groups of mobs, the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group, wreaking havoc. The county chief led the troops to clear the mobs, but the results were minimal. Chongqing's large, bright eyes were like black grapes. Her attention was attracted by Feng Gue's beard. She raised her claws and scratched. Feng Gue. Feng Jin could only hurriedly apologize on behalf of his naughty child. If it wasn't for Chongqing's antics, he would have started growing a beard long ago. It's all right. It's all right. It's rare to see such energetic children nowadays. At least they're better than the 2 boys at home. They're shy like little girls. Your sister-in-law is also strict with the children. She restricts them like wooden blocks. Feng Gue had been helping to guard the city for the past 2 years. He didn't spend much time at home. His 2 sons were in the family school. The rest of the time, it was his wife who raised them. Feng Jin sensed that something was amiss. Big brother, you and sister-in-law. Restless at home? It's nothing. Feng Gue replied calmly. He then said to Feng Jin, with her temperament, if sister-in-law is wronged, you don't have to tolerate it. All right, Huayu. Today's family banquet will only be about family matters. Chapter 590. When Feng Jin was at home, he was not valued. His elder brother was the heir of the clan, his younger brother was well-liked, his father was busy with government affairs, and his mother had to manage the household affairs. He was often neglected in the middle. Luckily, Feng Gue was a reliable elder brother and the 3 brothers had a good relationship. He had been away from home for many years. He had wanted to take this opportunity to find out more, but he did not expect Feng Gue to cut him off with one sentence. They only talked about family matters, not official matters. Feng Jin had no choice but to swallow the words that had welled up in his throat. Chongqing was a small child. She did not know about the undercurrent between her father and eldest uncle. She giggled and grabbed Feng Gue's beard, unwilling to let go. Feng Gue was a steady and conservative man, but he was not stingy with his family. He supported Chongqing's knees with one hand and let her sit on his arm. He wrapped his other arm around her shoulder to prevent her from falling. With both hands occupied, he naturally could not let this little ancestor let go of the beard that he had just grown for a few months. This child, her hands are really strong. Feng Gue thought of his 2 sons and looked at Chongqing enviously. Feng Jin's head hurt. This little brat, it was fine that she bullied her father at home, but why did she bully eldest uncle when she was out? Father. Feng Jin was a little angry, but when his daughter called him father sweetly, all his anger was extinguished. Feng Gue brought Feng Jin and his family back to the Feng family's main residence. The Feng family had been around for nearly 1,000 years. Anyone with the surname Feng in Shangyang County would find that their ancestors were related to the Feng family by blood. Such an illustrious and noble family had a rather plain ancestral home. It was not like those extravagant and sudden riches outside. Instead, it kept a low profile. Last year's earthquake, the Feng family's ancestral home had collapsed slightly. But the house was sturdy and the wood used to build it was said to be indestructible. The earthquake destroyed Shangjing overnight, but the Feng family's ancestral home only had a few old houses that were rarely used. Only a few people were injured. Father! Chongqing curled up in eldest Uncle Feng Gui's arms. Her large bright eyes dotted around. The unfamiliar and slightly gloomy building made her feel uneasy. She desperately wanted to find someone familiar. Seeing Feng Jin at the side, she rested her chin on Feng Gui's shoulder and looked straight at her father. You'll see Grandpa and Grandma in a while. Remember to greet them obediently. Don't be rude or mischievous, understand? Grandpa and Grandma? Chongqing tilted her head in confusion. Feng Jin let out a sigh, feeling regretful in his heart. When he was her age, he had long been taught etiquette by the wet nurses and maids. He could not be careless or rude. In the aristocratic families, even a child of 1 or 2 years old had to be polite. Age was not a gold medal that would exempt them from death if they made mistakes or caused trouble. But longevity. Before she was born, she was trapped in Shangjing with her husband and wife. When she was born, there was an earthquake. They drifted from place to place and settled down in Xiangyang district. Feng Jin doted on this daughter of his, who was not easy to come by and lived a difficult life. He even indulged her. The etiquette that should have been taught from a young age was not taught at all. Now that he was making a last-minute effort, he didn't know if it would work. Feng Jin was a little anxious. He was afraid that Chongqing would drop the ball at the critical moment. However, he did not know that although Chongqing was young, her instinct to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages was top-notch. In Jiang Pengji's words, this girl was born with the ability to judge and judge. Her intuition was very scary. For example, other children were afraid of Jiang Pengji, but Chongqing was especially close to her. Occasionally, she would come to the government office to play and accidentally cause trouble. If Jiang Pengji was present, what would be the girl's first reaction? She would definitely stagger towards her and hug her thighs to hide from Feng Jin. If Jiang Pengji was not around, Chongqing would hug someone else's thighs and hide faster than a rabbit. Such a clever girl, why would he be afraid that she would not take advantage of the situation? Knowing that Feng Jin had returned, the Feng family's ancestral residence was especially lively that day. However, this kind of lively referred to the large number of people, not the noise. Servants came and went continuously, but the maids and senior servants did not even make a sound when they walked. Feng Jin entered the main hall. His parents, whom he had not seen for many years, were already seated in the seats of honor. He pulled Wei Jingxian along to greet his parents. When Chongqing saw this, she stomped her feet and wanted to get down. Feng Gui smiled and put her down. She imitated Feng Jin's actions. However, she was wearing thick clothes and had a 3-headed body, so it was difficult for her to maintain her balance. She had just knelt down to pay her respects when her whole body fell forward. She rolled around twice. Perhaps it was a little painful, but her eyes quickly turned red. The scene that was originally solemn with a hint of warmth suddenly changed. Feng Ren also could not maintain his imposing manner as the head of the family. Madame Feng directly asked the senior servant beside her to carry Chongqing over. Madame Feng sighed. Huayu and Jingxian's child is already so big. When she first chose Feng Jin and his wife as hostages to go to Shangjing, she was extremely unwilling. When she heard that Wei Jingxian was diagnosed with pregnancy halfway through the journey, her heart did not calm down. Moreover, after the earthquake in Shangjing, the people were almost killed. Madame Feng washed her face with tears and almost cried herself blind. Feng Jin said, "Mother, Chongqing is a little naughty. Don't be fooled by her." Madame Feng took Chongqing. The child nestled obediently in her arms, extremely obedient. The child is naughty. At least it means that her body is strong and healthy, Madame Feng said without lifting her head. She teased Chongqing. "Do you know what to call me?" Chongqing opened her mouth crisply and asked with some doubt. "Grandfather?" With no one to refer to, Chongqing could not distinguish the difference between the two. Feng Jin already did not dare to lift his head. Madame Feng could not help but smile. She pointed at Feng Ren beside her and said, "This is grandfather." Chongqing cleverly changed her words and shouted, "Grandmother!" Sigh. Chongqing is so smart. Madame Feng took off the string of Buddha beads that she had worn for more than 10 years and put it on Chongqing's neck. Her face was full of smiles. Seeing this action, Feng Jin secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He had passed the first test. Wei Jingxian knew the importance of the string of Buddha beads. She was extremely satisfied. Only one person had a somewhat malicious look in her eyes. She clenched her fists tightly in her sleeves, leaving a few fingernail marks on her palms. Feng Gui's eyes turned cold. He secretly tugged at his wife to wake her up. Feng Gui's wife sensed her husband's stern gaze. She slightly shrank back and lowered her head. She secretly twisted her fingers and handkerchief. Feng Jin sensed the slightly malicious gaze. He looked over and frowned slightly. Was that his sister-in-law? He had a bellyful of things to say. He waited for Feng Gui and his wife to leave before he finally spoke. Sister-in-law just now. If it was in the past, he would have tolerated it for the sake of his eldest brother. But to release malice towards Chongqing because of a string of Buddha beads, he could not tolerate it. Madame Feng's face was slightly embarrassed. She said in a low voice, "The family is unfortunate." Feng Jin was surprised. What had happened in the past 2 years to make his mother so unhappy with a sister-in-law, whom she was extremely satisfied with? Chapter 591. For the sake of harmony within the family, Feng Jin and Feng Ju had received special education since young. They had to remember one thing at all times. The eldest brother was the heir of the family. No matter how outstanding the 2 younger brothers were, they could not covet what did not belong to them. No matter what family it was taboo for brothers to fight. Rather than giving every child the hope of competing, it was better to let them understand the difference from the start. Hence, unless there were special circumstances, Feng Jin and Feng Ju would rarely compete with Feng Gui. The differences between the 3 brothers could be seen in many aspects, such as marriage. Feng Gui's wife had been carefully selected, not limited to just Dongqing. Even the emperor's selection of a wife was not as meticulous as this. It was mainly based on the wife's family background, talent, bearing, character, appearance. All these criteria had to be carefully considered. Because of this, Feng Gui did not marry until he was 21 years old. What about Feng Jin's wife, Wei Jingxian? She came from an aristocratic family in Hejian. Her family background was average. She was talented, good-looking, and had a good temperament. Her only 2 blemishes were that she had entered a bandit's lair and escaped safely. She was once betrothed to Lu Shi but broke off the engagement in the end. There were plenty of people in Dongqing who were better off than Wei Jingxian. If Lu Shi had not been the matchmaker, Wei Jingxian would not have been able to become the second wife of the Feng family. Feng Jin had no intention of competing with Feng Gui. Wei Jingxian was not good enough to be the matriarch of the Feng family. It could be said that it was impossible for them to have any conflict of interest with Feng Gui and his wife. Feng Jin really could not understand why his sister-in-law would look at Chongqing with such malice. She did not even know how to hide it. As an outsider, Feng Jin was not suited to gossip about his sister-in-law. He could only let his wife do it. How could Feng Jin be at ease with a matriarch who had malice towards Chongqing? Wei Jingxian and her mother-in-law went to the back hall to rest while Feng Jin and Feng Ran chatted in the main hall. The father and son had not seen each other for a few years and had a lot to talk about. Wei Jingxian teased Chongqing while chatting with her mother-in-law about the trifling matters in the backyard. The mother-in-law and daughter-in-law chatted and laughed. Between them, there was the amusing Chongqing. The atmosphere was harmonious until Feng Jin's sister-in-law brought her 2 sons to pay their respects to Madame Feng. Compared to Feng Gui's magnanimous and upright temperament, his 2 sons were slightly dazed. They looked a little timid and petty. She had only met this sister-in-law 2 or 3 times and did not know much about her. However, she had heard about her sister-in-law's background and felt that it was a little strange. Madame Feng, who was smiling a moment ago, maintained a stiff smile throughout the whole process in front of her eldest daughter-in-law who was trying to please her. The atmosphere was quite awkward. Feng Gui's wife was displeased as well. She hurriedly said her goodbyes and left with her 2 sons. Wei Jingxian secretly heaved a sigh of relief when the awkward silence finally disappeared. Suddenly, an idea flashed through her mind, and she widened her eyes in astonishment. Swaying? The upbringing of the noble ladies was naturally strict. There was a set of rules for how they sat, stood, and walked. Although he was not inflexible, he should not be so frivolous, right? Wei Jingxian's expression cracked as she watched her sister-in-law squirm. Madame Feng sighed and whispered, He's finally gone. Mother, sister-in-law wasn't like this in the past, Madame Feng said. You haven't been married for long, how many times have you seen her? Wei Jingxian thought that her mother-in-law did not like her to talk too much, so she swallowed her words. Madame Feng continued, I thought that she was a good person, but I didn't expect her to be like this. Anyway, Jingxian, don't learn from her. Wei Jingxian replied, I know, mother. Madame Feng started to talk and rambled on about what had happened in the family all these years, causing Wei Jingxian's expression to turn ugly. After a while, eldest uncle is just going to tolerate it? She asked. Madame Feng frowned. What else can I do? After all, we are legally married, we can't divorce her just because of this. I was thinking of teaching her well. TSK, I don't know how Madame Du raised her daughter. She's so petty, yet she dares to call herself a lady from a noble family. Feng Gui's wife, Madame Feng Du, was born in the Du family of Zhongzhou. She was the fifth child in the family, and the eldest daughter of the Du family was the Empress of Zhongzhou. Madame Feng chose the fifth daughter of Madame Du's legal wife after much selection. Zhongzhou and Dongqing were too far apart, so Madame Feng could not see her future daughter-in-law with her own eyes. However, all the information that came back showed that Madame Feng Du had a good reputation. Family background, talent, appearance, self-restraint, conduct. There was nothing to nitpick about. From the time the two families set the wedding date to the actual wedding ceremony, it took nearly 2 years. Madame Feng had high expectations for her eldest daughter-in-law, but she was disappointed in the end. She was greedy, jealous, power-hungry, talkative, and sinister. Apart from these, what Madame Feng could not stand was that she had a vicious disease. Feng Jin returned to the courtyard where he lived before he got married. His wife carried Chongqing and was surrounded by servants. The husband and wife were whispering in the room. Feng Jin listened and his face cracked. Sister-in-law has a vicious disease? How could it be? A lady with a vicious disease could not be included in his mother's selection list. Wei Jingxian rolled her eyes impatiently and said, Didn't you notice that sister-in-law's walking posture is a little frivolous? Feng Jin bit her earlobe righteously. Jingxian, you already called her sister-in-law. As her uncle, how can I stare at her? Don't be so naughty. Wei Jingxian felt uncomfortable. She carried Chongqing and sat further away. According to mother, sister-in-law broke her leg. Feng Jin frowned. Was it born? How could it be? It was acquired, Wei Jingxian said. Acquired? The servants in the house are so careless? When Feng Jin was young, he fell and broke his teeth. The servants who served him were often punished. Wei Jingxian sighed and pulled the little braid on Chongqing's head. It was acquired, but it was not an accident. It was done by someone. Feng Jin's cheeks twitched. Someone broke her leg? Sister-in-law was born in the Du family of Zhongzhou. She had an elder sister who was the Empress of Zhongzhou. Feng Jin said, I know about this. Wei Jingxian emphasized impatiently. The one who wrote the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women and educated all the women in the world. Hearing the 3 words, 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, Feng Jin immediately became alert. Such a coincidence. Feng Jin said awkwardly. Wei Jingxian said, the Du family declined a few years ago and relied on this empress to support her maiden family. She wrote the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women and was highly praised by many scholars. She slowly gained the title of the virtuous empress and the Du family's reputation in Zhongzhou improved. The Du family educated the women in the family with the empress as a model. Guess what? This empress has the habit of binding her feet. Her feet are not even the size of an adult's palm and they are very beautiful. Feng Jin blushed. Just now you said that your husband is not serious. Why are you saying such nonsense too? Wei Jingxian snorted and said. A filthy person sees filth. Do you dare to say that you didn't think of anything that you shouldn't? Our sister-in-law, when she was 15 or 16 years old, in order to imitate the virtuous empress, her feet were also. Now it is difficult for her to walk and her temperament is increasingly gloomy and mean. Chapter 592. Feng Jin thought it was ridiculous. Sister-in-law was 15 or 16 years old. But, at this age, her feet are almost fully grown. If you want to make her small by force, Won't you break her leg bones? Why didn't the matchmaker mention such an absurd thing? If they had known that Feng Gui's wife was like this, not just the Feng family, even the small aristocratic families in Dongqing would not have agreed to marry her. Thinking of the two nephews he saw not long ago, Feng Jin felt upset. However, the conditions of Lady Fengdu were indeed very good in Zhongzhou. It was just that the national conditions of Zhongzhou and Dongqing were different. Wei Jingxian sighed and slowly narrated, Zhongzhou was fine a few years ago. The world was at peace, the rivers were clear, and the seas were calm. The gentry clans and the common people were extravagant. The empress of the Du family was a natural beauty. She was proficient in singing and dancing. She had a slim figure, and her dancing was as light as a swallow or a phoenix. She could do palm dances and flying dances. For a time, the noble ladies of the aristocratic families imitated her. When the news reached the song and dance school, the dancers tried to imitate the dance, but they were too big and too heavy, so it was difficult for them to perform such a stunning dance. I heard that the empress has a pair of snow-white feet that are more than 3 inches long. That's why she can dance like this. The empress was born with small feet. They were slender, well-proportioned, and beautiful. A palm dance to congratulate the emperor on his birthday. At that time, the atmosphere in Zhongzhou was open and luxurious, so it was naturally fashionable. The song and dance hall was busy learning, and hundreds of flowers competed with each other. It was very lively. Feng Gui's wife, Madame Fengdu, was the 5th child in the family. Although she wasn't neglected, she wasn't very favored either. For the sake of status and future glory, she imitated her elder sister in all aspects. The so-called broken bones and bound feet were also because of this. When this matter was spread out, people in the outside world didn't say that Madame Fengdu had learned to act like a dancer. Instead, they praised her for having the demeanor of a virtuous empress, and her reputation soared. To put it bluntly, Madame Fengdu had stepped on her empress sister to climb to the top, and her status among the noble ladies of Zhongzhou rose gradually. However, this was the practice of Zhongzhou. The aristocrats of Dongqing did not buy it. This was especially so for a noble family like the Feng family. How could they bear the fact that the wife of a noble family had an acquired disease? Although they didn't understand genetics or eugenics, they knew that children with good parents would be better and better. Choosing a woman with a broken leg and a malignant disease to be the matriarch of the Feng family was like eating a fly. But according to Feng Gui's personality, he wouldn't be so heartless as to abandon his wife for such a reason. After all, they still had 2 sons. As the saying goes, choosing a bad husband will ruin one's life. Marrying an unvirtuous wife will ruin 3 generations. With such a greedy, jealous, power-hungry, talkative, and sinister wife, Feng Jin did not dare to imagine what would happen to the current and next generation of the Feng family. His elder brother had been wronged. Feng Jin frowned with a headache. No matter how he looked at it, Madame Fengdu was not qualified to be the matriarch of the Feng family. With such a matriarch, this generation of the Feng clan might be all right, but the next generation might be in trouble. Even so, with Big Brother's temperament, he's always been responsible. I'm afraid he won't divorce his wife so easily. Rationally speaking, Feng Jin didn't mind changing his sister-in-law, but that was the business of the couple. Madame Fengdu hadn't done anything out of line so far. At most, she was greedy for money, jealous, power-hungry, and talkative. If he was careful and disciplined, maybe he could turn things around? Feng Gui intended to wait and see. He didn't expect his wife to be a great woman, but at the very least, she had to be at the standard of a normal noble lady. He didn't expect much else. Madame Feng planned to bring her 2 grandsons to her side and educate them well, so that they wouldn't be harmed by this unruly mother. As for this eldest daughter-in-law, she would teach her as much as she could. After all, Madame Feng was already the grandmother of 3 grandsons. She couldn't always manage the Feng family's finances, so she had to let her eldest daughter-in-law take over. Wei Jingxian sneered and said, I finally understand. Which daughter of the Du family from Zhongzhou is good? First, the eldest legitimate daughter of the Du family entered the palace and became the empress. She clamored about educating all the women in the world and wrote the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women, which was sung by the great Confucian scholars and earned the reputation of a virtuous empress. In the end, how many good daughters were ruined? Now, there's the eldest legitimate daughter of the Du family, who imitated the virtuous empress and bound her feet for the sake of her reputation. She's practically a nest of snakes and rats. If this Madame Fengdu hadn't imitated the virtuous empress style, how could she have gained such fame and been chosen to become Feng Gui's wife? Feng Jin was silent. He quietly tugged at the braids on Chongqing's head. Chongqing's little face frowned. She hugged Feng Jin's arm and wanted to bite it. As the husband of the former and the second uncle of the latter, it wasn't appropriate for Feng Jin to interrupt the conversation. He said nonchalantly, "Even so, I still feel that it's too absurd." If she had bound her feet when she was younger, when her bones were softer, he could still believe it. She was already 15 or 16 years old, yet she was still so cruel to herself. How determined and ruthless did she have to be? She was so cruel to herself, what more to others? The more he thought about it, the more Feng Jin shuddered. Wei Jingxian also said, "I feel that eldest uncle has been wronged. It was easy to get married, but difficult to divorce a wife. He had to cherish it." That night, Feng Jin brought Chongqing, who was dressed as a little red girl, along with his wife to the family banquet. Because Feng Gui had already reminded him, Feng Jin tactfully didn't bring up official matters. He only talked about interesting things that happened when they were young. Madame Fengdu sat beside Feng Gui with a gloomy expression. Her sinister eyes occasionally glanced at the smiling and blissful Chongqing. As the wife of a noble family, she had given birth to 2 legitimate sons for the Feng family in 3 years. Her mother-in-law had never hugged her son so intimately. Instead, she smiled at Feng Jin's losers, as if they were a family. This difference made Madame Fengdu feel extremely unbalanced. She didn't reflect on herself. Every time Madame Feng wanted to get close to her grandson, who was the one who obstructed her and guarded against her proper mother-in-law? In terms of gifts for the grandchildren, Feng Gui's 2 sons had the upper hand. Madame Feng had only given Chongqing a string of Buddhist beads and smiled at her, yet she had already incurred such jealousy and hatred. Sensing the change in Madame Fengdu's emotions, Feng Gui's expression was complicated. He was angry, furious, and somewhat helpless. Feng Gui had specially told Feng Jin not to talk about official matters at the family banquet. Yet Madame Fengdu was a useless teammate. After 3 rounds of wine, Madame Fengdu suddenly said, "Second uncle is now accompanying the traitor, Madame Lu. What's wrong with that? Aren't you afraid of implicating the rest of the family?" Feng Gui endured it and clenched his fists tightly. His expression was unsightly. Feng Jin said, "Since when was Jin's lord a traitor?" "Sister-in-law's words are very harsh." Madame Fengdu said in a strange tone, "The Dongqing imperial family is the legitimate one. The Lu family is merely an aristocratic family in Hejian. They won't be able to make a splash in Dongqing. However, everyone has their own ambitions. Second uncle yearns for the merit of attaining the throne. This is human nature. However, you should also polish your eyes and choose someone who is slightly more reliable. The Dongqing imperial family's power is at its peak. When the outcome of the battle in the south is decided, won't they have time to clean up the north? Second uncle is trying to drag the whole family down with him." "Legitimate?" Feng Jin sneered coldly. "You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.